Why good conversations matter. Hello, friend. I'm so glad you're here with me today. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another collection of communication tips or social tricks. This is about something much deeper, something that has the power to transform not just how you talk to people, but how you experience life itself. Think about the last conversation that really stayed with you. Maybe it was with an old friend who understood you without judgment, or perhaps a stranger who said exactly what you needed to hear at exactly the right moment. That feeling you had afterward, that warmth in your chest, that sense of being truly seen and heard, that's not an accident. That's the magic of genuine human connection, and it's available to you in every single interaction you have. Conversations shape relationships. Let me tell you about Sarah. She came to me once, frustrated and lonely, wondering why her relationships felt shallow despite being surrounded by people. She had colleagues, neighbors, family members, but something was missing. As we talked, I asked her to describe her typical conversation. She painted a familiar picture, rushing through pleasantries, waiting for her turn to speak, mentally rehearsing what she'd say next while the other person was still talking. Sarah isn't unusual. Most of us have been taught to be good speakers, but very few of us have been taught to be good listeners. We live in a world that celebrates the eloquent, the quick-witted, the ones who can command a room. But here's what nobody tells you: the people who truly shape our lives, who leave lasting impressions on our hearts, aren't necessarily the best talkers. They're the best conversationalists, and there's a profound difference. When you think about your closest relationships, the people who matter most to you, what do they all have in common? It's not that they always know the right thing to say. It's that when you're with them, you feel different. You feel lighter. You feel understood. You feel like you can breathe. That's the real currency of human connection, not clever words or impressive stories, but the quality of presence you bring to each moment. Every conversation you have is like planting a seed. Some seeds are planted hastily on hard ground and never take root. Others are planted with care, watered with attention, and given space to grow. Years later, you might find yourself surrounded by a garden you didn't even realize you were cultivating. Your relationships, your opportunities, your sense of belonging in the world, they all grow from these small, daily exchanges. I remember meeting an elderly man at a coffee shop who told me something I've never forgotten. He said that when he looked back on his 87 years, what he remembered most weren't the big events, the promotions, the vacations, or even the major milestones. What he remembered were conversations. A talk with his father before he passed away. A late-night discussion with his wife when they were young and broke. An honest conversation with his daughter that healed years of distance. These moments, he said, were his life. People remember how you make them feel. Maya Angelou famously said that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. This isn't just a beautiful sentiment. It's neurological fact. Our brains are wired to remember emotional experiences far more vividly than factual information. Think about the last time someone really listened to you. Not just heard your words, but listened with their whole attention. How did that feel? Chances are, you can recall that feeling right now, even if you can't remember the specific words that were said. That person made you feel valued, important, worthy of attention. They gave you a gift that costs nothing but means everything. Now think about the opposite experience. Someone checking their phone while you're talking. Someone whose eyes glaze over as they wait for you to finish. Someone who interrupts to tell their own story before you've finished yours. That feeling of being dismissed, of being invisible, that stays with us too. It accumulates over time, building walls between people, creating distance where there could be closeness. Here's something fascinating: research in neuroscience shows that when we feel truly heard, our brains release oxytocin, the same hormone released during hugging or bonding with a baby. Good conversation literally changes our brain chemistry. It makes us feel safe, connected, and alive. This is why a single meaningful conversation can shift your entire mood, why a heart-to-heart with a friend can feel like medicine, why talking through something difficult can bring relief even when nothing about the situation has changed. I worked with a manager named David who couldn't understand why his team seemed disengaged. He gave clear instructions, held regular meetings, and was always available. But when I shadowed him for a day, I noticed something. In every conversation, David was already thinking about the next task. His body was present, but his attention was elsewhere. His team members could feel it, even if they couldn't articulate it. They felt like items on a checklist, not people with thoughts and feelings. We did a simple exercise. For 1 week, David committed to being fully present in every conversation, even if just for 2 minutes. He put away his phone, made eye contact, and really listened. The transformation was remarkable. Within days, team members were coming to him with ideas they'd been holding back. Problems were being solved more creatively. The office atmosphere shifted. Nothing had changed except the quality of David's attention, but that changed everything. Speaking less, understanding more. There's a beautiful paradox at the heart of good conversation: the less you speak, the more impact you have. This feels counterintuitive in a culture that rewards being heard, being seen, being vocal. We're taught that to be interesting, we must be interested. But I'd go further: to be truly interesting, we must be genuinely interested. When you walk into a conversation with the goal of understanding rather than being understood, something magical happens. The pressure drops away. You're no longer performing or trying to impress. You're exploring, discovering, connecting. And ironically, this is when people find you most compelling. I once observed 2 people at a party. One was clearly the more charismatic speaker, witty, animated, full of stories. The other was quieter, asking questions, nodding thoughtfully, occasionally adding brief observations. At the end of the evening, I asked several people who'd interacted with both which person they'd enjoyed talking to more. Almost everyone chose the quieter person. Why? Because that person made them feel interesting. Everyone left their conversations feeling uplifted, heard, valued. This isn't about being passive or never sharing your own thoughts. It's about understanding that conversation is a dance, not a solo performance. The most beautiful dances happen when both partners are attuned to each other, responding and adjusting in real time, creating something together that neither could create alone. Here's what speaking less and understanding more actually looks like in practice. It means pausing before you respond, giving yourself a moment to really absorb what was just said instead of jumping in immediately. It means asking a follow-up question about what the other person just shared instead of pivoting to your own similar experience. It means noticing not just the words, but the emotion beneath the words, the story behind the story. Let me share a technique that changed my life. I call it the 3-second pause. Whenever someone finishes speaking, I count 3 seconds in my head before responding. Those 3 seconds do several things. They show the other person I'm actually considering what they said. They give them space to add more if they want to. They allow me to move past my reflexive response and access something deeper and more thoughtful. Try it. Those 3 seconds will feel long at first, almost uncomfortable, but they create a quality of presence that people can feel. There's an old story about a young journalist who interviewed a famous writer. The journalist asked dozens of questions, taking furious notes, barely pausing between queries. At the end, he thanked the writer profusely for such a fascinating interview. The writer smiled and said, "But you didn't learn anything about me. You only confirmed what you already thought." The journalist had been so busy with his own agenda that he'd missed who was actually sitting in front of him. We do this all the time. We enter conversations with our own narratives already written. We're looking for confirmation, not discovery. We're waiting to speak, not listening to understand. And in doing so, we miss the richness of human complexity, the surprising depth that exists in every person we meet. The journey ahead. What I'm offering you in this audiobook isn't a formula or a script. It's a way of being with people that honors their humanity and your own. It's a practice that gets deeper and more rewarding the more you engage with it. Some of what I share might seem simple, but don't mistake simple for easy. The most profound truths are often the simplest, and the simplest practices require the most courage. As we move forward together, I'm going to share with you the specific principles and techniques that transform ordinary exchanges into meaningful connections. We'll explore the psychology behind why certain approaches work and others fall flat. I'll give you real examples, practical exercises, and ways to integrate this into your daily life, whether you're talking to your partner, your child, your boss, or a stranger in line at the grocery store. But more than anything, I want to invite you into a different relationship with conversation itself. Not as something to get right or win at, but as an opportunity for genuine human connection, for learning, for growth, for joy. Because here's the truth, in a world that's increasingly digital, divided, and disconnected, the ability to have a real conversation is becoming both rarer and more precious. Every conversation is a chance to make someone feel less alone. Every interaction is an opportunity to learn something new about the vast complexity of human experience. Every exchange, no matter how brief, is a moment where you can choose to be fully present and fully alive. So take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. Release any expectation about being perfect at this. You already know how to connect with people. You've been doing it since you were born. What we're doing here is simply remembering what you already know, clearing away the layers of social anxiety and learned behavior that have obscured your natural ability to be with another human being. The conversations you have today will shape tomorrow's relationships. The attention you give now will compound into deeper connections later. And it all starts with this moment, right here, with your willingness to learn, to try, to open yourself to the possibility that every person you meet has something valuable to offer if you're willing to truly listen. Are you ready? Let's begin this journey together. Let me show you how speaking less can help you say more, how understanding others will help you understand yourself, and how the simple act of being present in conversation can transform not just your relationships, but your entire experience of being human. Because at the end of the day, we're all just walking each other home, and good conversation is the path that makes the journey worthwhile. Welcome. I'm honored to walk this path with you. Chapter 1: The Psychology of Human Connection. Welcome back, friend. I'm so glad you're continuing this journey with me. In this chapter, we're going to dive deep into something that lives at the very core of what makes us human, our profound, unshakable need for connection. Not surface-level connection, not the kind you get from collecting followers or exchanging pleasantries, but real, soul-deep connection that comes from being truly heard and understood. Before we begin, I want you to think about something. Close your eyes for a moment if you're in a safe place to do so. Remember a time when you felt completely alone, even though you might have been surrounded by people. Maybe you were at a party where everyone seemed to be having a great time, but you felt invisible. Or perhaps you were going through something difficult and the people around you just didn't get it. Hold that feeling for a moment. Notice where it sits in your body. That heaviness, that ache, that's not weakness. That's your soul telling you it needs what every human soul needs, to be seen, to be heard, to matter. Now, think of the opposite moment. A time when someone really got you. When you shared something vulnerable and instead of judgment or advice or someone changing the subject, you received pure understanding. Remember how that felt? Like exhaling after holding your breath for too long. Like coming home after a long journey. That feeling, that relief, that warmth, that's what we're going to learn to create for other people, and in doing so, for ourselves. Why people crave being heard. Let me tell you something that changed everything for me. Years ago, I was working as a counselor, and I had this client named Marcus. Marcus was a successful businessman, 47 years old, seemingly had it all together. He came to me saying he felt empty, disconnected, like he was going through the motions of life without really living. We spent the first session with me asking questions, and Marcus giving these careful, measured responses. Everything was fine. Everything was under control. Everything was just empty. Then, in our third session, something shifted. I asked him about his childhood, and he mentioned, almost offhand, that his father had never really talked to him. I paused, and instead of moving on to the next question, I simply said, "Tell me more about that." And something broke open. Marcus started talking, really talking, about how he'd spend hours as a kid preparing things to tell his dad, hoping to get his attention, his approval, his interest. And how his father would nod absently while reading the newspaper or watching TV, never really looking at him, never really listening. Marcus said something I've never forgotten. I learned that my words didn't matter. So I guess I learned that I didn't matter. He was 47 years old, and he was still that little boy, trying to be heard by a father who wasn't listening. And here's the thing, we're all Marcus. Maybe not in the exact same way, but we all carry these wounds of not being heard, of being dismissed, of feeling like what we have to say isn't worth someone's full attention. The human need to be heard isn't a want, it's not a preference, it's a fundamental psychological necessity, as real as our need for food or shelter. There's a reason solitary confinement is considered one of the harshest punishments in the prison system. We're not built to be alone, and we're not built to be unheard. Our brains literally develop through interaction with other brains. Babies who aren't talked to, who aren't engaged with, suffer developmental delays even if all their physical needs are met. Connection isn't luxury, it's survival. Research in neuroscience shows us something fascinating. When we feel heard and understood, our brains release a cascade of chemicals, oxytocin, which creates feelings of bonding and trust, dopamine, which makes us feel pleasure and motivation, and serotonin, which regulates our mood and makes us feel significant and important. In other words, being truly heard doesn't just feel good emotionally, it creates a biological response that our bodies crave. But here's the challenging part, our modern world has created a crisis of being unheard. We're more connected than ever before, with hundreds or thousands of online connections, but we're lonelier than we've ever been. Studies show that despite having access to more communication tools than any generation in human history, people today report feeling more isolated, more misunderstood, and more disconnected than at any point in the past 50 years. Why? Because connection isn't about the number of interactions, it's about the quality of attention. You can have 1,000 people see your social media post and still feel unseen. You can be in a room full of people having conversations and feel completely alone. What we're craving isn't more noise, it's someone who will be quiet with us, who will listen with their whole being, who will hold space for our truth without needing to fix it or change it or make it about themselves. I want you to understand something crucial. When someone is talking to you, they're not just sharing information. They're taking a risk. They're making themselves vulnerable. They're saying, here's a piece of me. Will you handle it with care? And every time we check our phone while someone's speaking, every time we interrupt, every time we half listen while thinking about what we'll say next, we're answering that question with a no. We're saying, your piece isn't valuable enough for my full attention. But when we truly listen, when we give someone the gift of our complete presence, we're doing something sacred. We're saying, you matter. Your experience matters. Your feelings are valid. You're worth my time and attention. This is powerful medicine in a world where so many people feel invisible. Think about the people in your life who you feel closest to. I'm willing to bet that these aren't necessarily the people who give you the best advice or solve your problems. They're the people who make you feel heard. They're the ones who, when you're talking, you can feel them really listening. Their attention doesn't waver. Their eyes don't glaze over. They're with you, fully present, creating a space where you can unfold and be yourself without fear of judgment or dismissal. Emotional validation, the heart of connection. Now let's talk about something that might be the single most powerful tool in creating meaningful connection, emotional validation. This concept is simple to understand but profound in its impact. Emotional validation means acknowledging and accepting someone's feelings, whether or not you agree with them or would feel the same way in their situation. Here's where most of us get it wrong. Someone tells us they're upset about something, and our immediate instinct is to fix it, to explain why they shouldn't feel that way, or to minimize it. Your friend says, I'm so stressed about this presentation at work, and you say, oh, you'll be fine. You're always great at presentations. You think you're being supportive, but what you've actually done is dismissed their feeling. You've told them their stress isn't valid, isn't warranted, isn't real, But I caught myself. Now imagine a different response. Instead, that sounds really stressful. That must have really hurt, finding out she lied to you. Tell me what's worrying you most about it. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, and then she started crying. In the first response, you shut down the emotion and tried to make it go away. Because someone had finally acknowledged how she actually felt instead of trying to talk her out of it. Invited them to explore it more. She said, "Everyone keeps telling me it's not a big deal. The first response, that I'm overreacting, good intentions, creates distance. But it feels like a big deal to me. The second creates connection. And that's the key. Her feelings were real to her. Let me share a story about my friend Jennifer. She called me one evening, really upset her emotions were validated. Daughter had lied to her about where the situation more calmly. As she talked, but if I could hear the hurt in her voice, problem-solving or minimizing, the sense she would have felt just as alone as before she called. My first instinct was to tell her that all teenagers lie sometimes, that it's normal, that it would be okay. Here's something fascinating from psychology research. When people's emotions are validated, they actually calm down faster than when people try to talk them out of their feelings. It seems counterintuitive, right? You'd think that acknowledging someone's distress would amplify it. But the opposite is true. When we feel heard and understood, our nervous system can relax. It's only when we feel misunderstood or dismissed that our emotions escalate, as we desperately try to make people understand how we really feel. Emotional validation doesn't mean you agree with someone's interpretation of events. It doesn't mean you think their response is proportional or that you would feel the same way. It simply means you acknowledge that their feelings are real and make sense from their perspective. You can validate someone's anger even if you think they misunderstood the situation. You can validate someone's fear even if you believe there's nothing to be afraid of. Because emotions aren't right or wrong, they just are. Let me give you some practical language for emotional validation. When someone shares something difficult, try phrases like, "That sounds really hard," or "I can understand why you'd feel that way," or "That must be really frustrating," or simply, "Tell me more about that." These phrases do something magical. They give the other person permission to feel what they're feeling. They create safety. And here's another layer to this. Often, people aren't even sure what they're feeling until they have someone to talk to who validates their emotions. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone start a conversation confused or numb, and through the process of being heard and validated, they discover what's really going on for them emotionally. It's like the validation creates space for self-understanding. Think about a time someone invalidated your feelings. Maybe you were excited about something and someone said, "That's not that big a deal," or you were hurt and someone said, "You're too sensitive." How did that feel? Probably like a door slamming in your face. Like you needed to defend yourself or prove that your feelings were legitimate. That defensive feeling, that's what happens when emotions aren't validated. And it's the opposite of connection. Now think about a time someone validated your feelings. Someone who said, "Wow, I can see why that would be upsetting," or "That's so exciting. I'm happy for you." How did that feel? Probably like being wrapped in a warm blanket. Like you could finally relax. Like you weren't alone anymore. That's the power of validation. Creating safety in conversations. Everything we've talked about so far, being heard, emotional validation, it all comes down to one thing: safety. People can't be authentic, can't be vulnerable, can't truly connect unless they feel safe. And creating that safety? That's the real art of conversation. Safety in conversation isn't about avoiding difficult topics or never disagreeing. It's about creating an environment where people feel free to be themselves, to share their truth, to express their feelings without fear of judgment, dismissal, or attack. It's about establishing, through your words and your presence, that this space, this conversation, this relationship, is a place where they can lower their guard. Let me tell you about something I learned from my mentor, a therapist who'd been practicing for 40 years. She told me that in all her years of working with people, she'd learned one fundamental truth: people don't change, heal, or grow when they're defensive. They change when they feel safe. When someone feels threatened, even subtly, even unintentionally, their brain goes into protection mode. The thinking, reflective part of their brain goes offline, and the survival part takes over. You can't have a meaningful conversation with someone's survival brain. You can only have a meaningful conversation when people feel safe enough to be present and open. So how do we create this safety? It starts with something simple but profound: non-judgment. This doesn't mean you don't have opinions or values. It means that when someone is sharing with you, you temporarily suspend your judgment and just listen with curiosity and compassion. You create a space where they can explore their thoughts and feelings without worrying about what you're thinking about them. I remember working with a couple, David and Lauren, who came to me because they couldn't talk to each other anymore without fighting. Every conversation turned into an argument. As I watched them interact, I noticed that neither one felt safe. David would start to say something, and before he even finished, Lauren would get defensive or critical. Lauren would share a feeling, and David would immediately explain why she was wrong to feel that way. They'd created a relationship where conversation felt like combat, and neither one would risk vulnerability. We spent weeks just working on creating safety. I taught them to listen without interrupting, to validate each other's feelings before responding, to ask questions instead of making assumptions. It was slow, awkward work at first. They'd been in defensive mode for so long that being open felt dangerous. But gradually, something shifted. They started having conversations where both people felt heard. And as the safety grew, so did their connection. One of the most powerful ways to create safety is through what I call generous interpretation. This means that when someone says something unclear or potentially hurtful, instead of assuming the worst, you assume the best and ask for clarification. Instead of thinking, they're attacking me, you think, they're struggling to express something. Let me help them. For example, if your partner says, you never help around the house, instead of getting defensive and listing everything you do, you might say, it sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed. What specifically would be most helpful to you right now? See how that changes everything? You've taken a statement that could start a fight and turned it into an opportunity for connection and problem solving. Another crucial element of safety is consistency. People need to know that you're listening, your openness, your acceptance isn't conditional on them saying the right things or having the right feelings. Some of the deepest hurts in relationships come from inconsistent safety, when someone is loving and accepting one day but critical and dismissive the next. That inconsistency keeps people in a constant state of vigilance, never quite able to relax and be themselves. I want to share something personal with you. I grew up in a household where emotional safety was inconsistent. Some days, sharing feelings was okay. Other days, it would result in anger or mockery. I learned to be constantly vigilant, to test the waters before saying anything real, to keep my guard up. It took me years as an adult to learn to trust that when someone said they wanted to hear how I felt, they actually meant it. That inconsistency in my childhood created patterns that affected every relationship I had. That's why I'm so passionate about teaching people to create consistent safety in their conversations. Because I know what it's like to live without it, and I know the freedom that comes from finally having it. When you create safety for others, you're not just making a conversation more pleasant. You're giving them something they might have never had before, a space where they can fully be themselves. Here's a practical technique for creating safety: matching and pacing. This comes from the field of rapport building in psychology. It means subtly matching the other person's energy, tone, and body language. If they're speaking softly, you speak softly. If they're animated, you bring more energy. If they lean forward, you lean forward. This isn't about mimicking them in an obvious way. It's about showing, on a subconscious level, that you're with them, that you're on their team. But perhaps the most important element of creating safety is this: you have to actually be safe. You can't fake this. If you're going to judge someone, they'll feel it, no matter how carefully you choose your words. If you're impatient for them to finish so you can talk, they'll sense it. If you're storing up what they're saying to use against them later, they'll know. Creating safety requires you to actually be open, curious, compassionate, and present. It requires you to do your own work of letting go of the need to be right, the need to control, the need to protect your ego. This is why this work is as much about personal growth as it is about communication skills. To create safety for others, you have to feel safe within yourself. You have to be comfortable with difficult emotions, both yours and theirs. You have to be willing to sit with uncertainty, with not having all the answers, with being wrong sometimes. You have to develop what I call emotional courage, the courage to show up fully, to risk being hurt, to stay open even when it's uncomfortable. Let me close this chapter with an invitation. For the next week, I want you to practice one thing. Before every conversation, take a moment to set an intention. Silently say to yourself, "My intention is to make this person feel heard and safe." That's it. Don't try to be perfect. Don't try to remember all the techniques. Just set that intention and see what happens. Notice how it changes your energy, your attention, your presence. Notice how people respond differently when they unconsciously sense that you're creating space for them. Because here's the beautiful truth: you already have everything you need to create meaningful connection. You don't need to be more clever or more interesting or more anything. You just need to be willing to show up with an open heart and genuine curiosity about the person in front of you. You need to remember that everyone you meet is carrying something heavy, is longing to be understood, is hoping that maybe, just maybe, you'll be the person who really sees them. And when you become that person, when you learn to create these moments of genuine connection, something miraculous happens. You don't just change other people's lives. You change your own. Because in learning to truly hear others, you learn to hear yourself. In creating safety for others, you create safety within yourself. In validating others' emotions, you learn to validate your own. This journey toward better conversations is really a journey toward becoming more fully human, more fully alive, more fully connected to the beautiful, messy, profound experience of being alive together on this planet. Take a deep breath. Let all of this settle. And know that every conversation from this moment forward is an opportunity to practice these principles, to create connection, to make someone feel a little less alone. That's sacred work, friend. And I'm so grateful you're willing to do it. Chapter 2: The Art of Asking Better Questions. Welcome to Chapter 2, my friend. I hope you've been practicing what we explored in our last chapter, and I hope you're beginning to notice subtle shifts in your conversations, in how people respond to you when you create that sense of safety and presence. Today, we're going to explore something that might seem simple on the surface but holds extraordinary power: the art of asking questions. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I already know how to ask questions. I do it all the time. And you're right, you do. But here's what I've discovered over years of studying human connection: there's a world of difference between asking questions to gather information and asking questions to create connection. Most of us were taught the former. Today, I'm going to teach you the latter. Think about the last networking event or social gathering you attended. How many times did someone ask you, "So, what do you do?" And how many times did that question lead to a conversation that actually mattered, that left you feeling energized rather than drained? Probably not many. That's because most of our questions are transactional, surface level, designed to fill silence rather than create connection. They're conversational autopilot, and while they're not inherently bad, they're not going to transform your relationships either. The questions we're going to explore today are different. They're invitations. They're doorways. They're ways of saying to another person, "I see you as more than just your job title or your role or your surface story. I'm curious about who you really are." And when you learn to ask these kinds of questions, when you develop this skill as a genuine practice rather than a technique, you'll find that conversations become infinitely more interesting, more meaningful, and more alive. Open-ended questions, creating space for truth. Let me tell you about a conversation I had with my nephew, Jake, when he was 16. He came over for dinner one evening, and like most teenagers, he was monosyllabic, answering every question with the minimum possible words. "How was school?" "Fine." "How's basketball going?" "Good." "Are you excited about the college applications?" "I guess." It was like trying to have a conversation with a brick wall, and I could feel myself getting frustrated. Then I remembered something. I was asking closed questions, questions that could be answered with a single word. I was essentially creating a verbal dead end at every turn. So I shifted. Instead of "How was school?" I asked, "What was the most interesting thing that happened at school this week?" His head came up. He thought for a moment. And then he started talking, really talking, about this debate in his history class about whether historical figures should be judged by modern moral standards. We ended up having a 40-minute conversation about ethics, context, and how we understand the past. It wasn't because Jake suddenly became more talkative. It was because I finally asked him a question that gave him room to actually share something real. Open-ended questions are questions that can't be answered with a simple yes or no. They require thought, reflection, and genuine sharing. Instead of "Did you have a good day?" try "What made today memorable?" Instead of "Do you like your job?" try "What's the most fulfilling part of what you do?" See the difference? The first version of each question is a dead end. The second is an invitation to go deeper. Here's what's fascinating about open-ended questions from a psychological perspective: they signal to the other person that you're genuinely interested in their inner world, not just collecting data points about their external circumstances. When you ask someone, "Are you happy?" you're asking for a binary assessment. When you ask, "What brings you joy these days?" you're inviting them to reflect, to share, to reveal something about what matters to them. The second question creates intimacy. The first creates distance. I worked with a woman named Patricia who complained that her adult children never really talked to her anymore. When they called, the conversations were brief and superficial. As we explored her typical phone calls with her kids, I noticed a pattern. Every question she asked could be answered in one or two words. "Are you eating well?" "Yes, Mom." "Is work busy?" "Pretty busy." "Do you need anything?" "No, I'm fine." Patricia thought she was showing interest, but she was actually creating a conversational structure that kept her children at arm's length. We worked on transforming her questions. Instead of "Is work busy?" she started asking, "What's the most challenging thing you're working on right now?" Instead of "Are you eating well?" she asked, "Have you discovered any new recipes or restaurants lately?" The change was dramatic. Her son, who typically kept calls under 5 minutes, talked for 20 minutes about a complex project he was leading at work. Her daughter shared her struggles with balancing her career and her desire to start a family. The questions opened doors that had been closed for years. But here's something crucial to understand. Open-ended questions only work if you're genuinely prepared to hear the answer. If you ask someone what's been weighing on your mind lately, you need to be ready to sit with whatever they share, whether it's heavy or uncomfortable or not what you expected. You can't ask deep questions and then get impatient when people give you deep answers. That's conversational bait and switch, and people can feel it. Let me give you some powerful open-ended questions that I've found consistently create meaningful connection. Try them out, but remember, the key is genuine curiosity, not performing a technique. What's been surprising you lately? What are you learning about yourself right now? What's something you're excited about? What's been harder than you expected? What would you do more of if you had the time and energy? Each of these questions invites reflection and sharing. Each one says, "I'm interested in your inner experience, not just your external circumstances." There's also an art to the follow-up question, and this is where most people miss the opportunity to go deeper. Someone answers your open-ended question, and instead of following the thread they've offered, you jump to a new topic or pivot to your own similar experience. Don't do that. When someone shares something, follow it deeper. If they mention they're learning something about themselves, ask, "What prompted that realization?" If they talk about something being harder than expected, ask, "What's been the hardest part?" Each follow-up is another invitation to go deeper, to share more, to be more fully themselves. I remember interviewing an author for a podcast once. I asked him what surprised him most about the writing process for his latest book. He gave a thoughtful answer about discovering a theme he hadn't planned. Most interviewers would have moved to the next prepared question. Instead, I asked, "When did you first notice that theme emerging?" That follow-up led to him sharing a deeply personal story about his relationship with his father, which became the most powerful part of the interview. All because I followed the thread instead of sticking to my script. Curiosity-based listening, the foundation of great questions. Now, let's talk about something that's absolutely essential to asking better questions: curiosity-based listening. This is different from what most of us do, which is waiting to talk listening. You know what I mean. Someone is speaking, and instead of really hearing them, you're mentally preparing your response, thinking about what you're going to say next, or waiting for them to finish so you can share your own story. Curiosity-based listening is a completely different orientation. It's listening with the sole purpose of understanding the other person more deeply. It's listening not to respond, but to discover. It's approaching every conversation as an anthropologist might approach a newly discovered culture, with genuine fascination and a desire to learn. Let me share something vulnerable with you. For most of my life, I was a terrible listener. I was so focused on being interesting, on having something valuable to contribute, on proving my intelligence or my wit, that I barely heard what other people were saying. I remember once, a friend was telling me about a difficult situation with her sister, and I interrupted her halfway through to tell her about a similar situation I'd been in. She politely listened to my story, and then the conversation moved on. Years later, she mentioned in passing how alone she'd felt during that difficult time with her sister. I realized with horror that I'd made her crisis about me. I'd stolen her moment of vulnerability and turned it into my moment of storytelling. That realization changed everything for me. I started practicing what I now call listening with empty hands. I approach conversations without an agenda, without a story I'm waiting to tell, without advice I'm eager to give. I listen to understand, not to respond. And here's what I discovered: when you listen this way, the right questions naturally arise. You don't have to think about what to ask because your genuine curiosity guides you. There's a neuroscience explanation for this. When we're truly curious about something, our brains enter a state that researchers call exploratory mode. In this state, we're more attentive, more present, more able to notice nuance and subtlety. We pick up on things we'd otherwise miss: the slight change in someone's tone when they mention a particular topic, the way their energy shifts when they talk about different aspects of their life, the unspoken feelings beneath their words. This information naturally shapes our questions, leading us to ask about what actually matters rather than what we think we should ask about. I worked with a team leader named Robert who was struggling to connect with his employees. He told me he asked them questions all the time, checking in regularly, but still felt distant from them. When I observed his team meetings, I saw the problem immediately. Robert was asking questions, yes, but he wasn't listening to the answers with curiosity. He was listening with an agenda, making sure tasks were on track, identifying problems to solve, gathering information he needed. His questions were transactional, not relational. We did an exercise where I asked Robert to have one-on-one conversations with his team members where his only goal was to get curious about them as people, not as employees. No agenda, no task-related questions, just genuine curiosity about who they were and what mattered to them. Robert was uncomfortable at first. It felt inefficient, like he was wasting time. But after his first conversation using this approach, something shifted. He came back energized, saying, "I learned more about Sarah in 30 minutes than I learned in the 2 years she's worked for me." What changed wasn't just the questions he asked, though those changed too. What changed was his quality of attention. He listened to learn, not to manage. And that listening naturally led to questions that deepened connection rather than just extracting information. Here's a practice I want you to try: the next conversation you have, make a conscious decision to ask 3 questions in a row about what the other person has shared before you share anything about yourself. 3 questions. This does something powerful. First, it forces you to actually listen to what they're saying so you can formulate relevant questions. Second, it signals to them that you're genuinely interested. Third, it often leads the conversation to a depth that wouldn't otherwise reach. For example, your friend mentions they're thinking about changing careers. Instead of immediately sharing your thoughts on career changes or telling them about when you changed careers, you might ask, "What's prompting you to think about a change?" They answer. Then, "What would be different in your ideal next role?" They answer. Then, "What's holding you back from making the change?" 3 questions, each building on their previous answer, each inviting them deeper into their own thinking. This is curiosity-based listening in action. But here's something important: curiosity-based listening isn't about asking questions like a detective interrogating a suspect. It's about genuine interest in understanding the other person's experience. Your tone, your body language, your energy all matter as much as the words you use. If your questions feel like an interview rather than a conversation, people will feel examined rather than understood. The key is warmth, openness, and authentic interest. I love what the poet Rumi said: sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. In conversations, this means letting go of your need to have smart things to say and instead embracing wonder at the complexity of the person in front of you. Every person you meet has lived an entire life you know nothing about, has perspective shaped by experiences you haven't had, has wisdom you haven't discovered. When you approach conversations with this awareness, curiosity becomes natural. Questions that deepen connection, going beyond small talk. Now let's talk about the questions that truly transform relationships, the ones that move you from acquaintance to friend, from surface to depth, from polite to real. These are the questions that require courage to ask and courage to answer, but they're the questions that create the kind of connections most people are desperately craving. I call these soul questions because they bypass the superficial and go straight to what matters. They're not appropriate for every context, obviously. You wouldn't ask these questions in line at the grocery store or in the first 5 minutes of meeting someone. But when you have an established relationship and you want to deepen it, when you sense someone is ready to go beyond small talk, when you yourself are tired of surface conversation, these are the questions that open new doors. Here's one of my favorites: what do you wish people understood about you? This question is powerful because it acknowledges that we're all walking around feeling misunderstood in some way. It gives the other person permission to share something real, something they might not usually talk about. I asked this question to a colleague once who always seemed confident and put together. She paused for a long moment and then said, "I wish people understood that I struggle with anxiety every single day. Everyone thinks I have it all figured out, but I'm terrified most of the time." That one question transformed our relationship. She felt seen, and I got to know the real person beneath the polished exterior. Another powerful question: what's something you've been thinking about a lot lately? This question is beautiful in its simplicity. It doesn't dictate what the person should talk about. It just invites them to share what's actually occupying their mental and emotional space. I've had people respond to this question by talking about everything from their fears about aging to their dreams of writing a novel to their concerns about their marriage. The question creates space for whatever is real and present for them. Then there's this one: what are you carrying right now that you wish you could put down? This is an invitation to talk about burdens, struggles, the heavy things we all carry but rarely speak about. It's a vulnerable question because it assumes the person is carrying something difficult, which might feel presumptuous. But I've found that almost everyone has something they wish they could release, and being asked about it directly can be profoundly relieving. I remember asking this question to my mother during a visit. She was in her late 60s, and I'd noticed she seemed more tired than usual, more withdrawn. When I asked what she was carrying, she teared up. She told me she'd been feeling like a burden to the family, that she was worried about becoming unable to care for herself, that she felt like her life was narrowing and she didn't know how to talk about it. We had the deepest conversation we'd had in years, all because I asked a question that gave her permission to share the weight she'd been carrying alone. Here are more questions that consistently deepen connection. What's a belief you used to hold strongly that you've changed your mind about? This one invites people to share their growth and evolution. What's something you're afraid of that most people wouldn't guess? This acknowledges that we all have fears we hide. What's a question you wish people would ask you? This is meta and beautiful because it lets the person direct the conversation to what they actually want to talk about. What makes you feel most alive? This goes straight to someone's values and passions. But here's what makes these questions truly powerful: you have to be willing to answer them yourself. Connection is reciprocal. If you ask someone a vulnerable question and they share something real, you need to be willing to share something equally real back. This isn't about one-upping their vulnerability, it's about meeting them at the depth they've offered. This is how intimacy is built, through mutual vulnerability, through both people being willing to be seen. I teach something I call the vulnerability ladder. You start with relatively safe questions and gradually increase the depth as trust builds. You don't ask someone about their deepest fears in your first conversation. You start with what's been good in your life lately, and based on how they respond, based on the level of openness they show, you gradually ask deeper questions. You're constantly reading the other person, noticing their comfort level, adjusting your depth accordingly. There's also an art to holding the answers to these deeper questions. When someone shares something vulnerable, your response matters immensely. This isn't the time for advice unless they specifically ask for it. This isn't the time to share your similar experience unless it genuinely serves their process. This is the time for simple acknowledgement, for validating their experience, for asking one more gentle question that lets them go even deeper if they want to. A simple thank you for sharing that with me can be incredibly powerful. Or, that sounds really hard, or I appreciate you trusting me with this. These responses honor the risk the person took in being vulnerable with you. They create safety for future vulnerable sharing. They communicate that their openness was valued and respected. Let me share something I've learned about timing. The best time for deep questions often isn't when you're sitting face to face in a formal conversation. It's during side-by-side moments, driving in a car, walking together, doing dishes side by side, sitting on a porch watching the sunset. There's something about not having to maintain direct eye contact that makes vulnerability easier. Some of the deepest conversations I've had with my partner have happened while we're on a long drive, both looking ahead at the road, the lack of direct eye contact somehow making it easier to say hard things. I also want to address something important. What if you ask a deep question and the person deflects or gives a superficial answer? This happens, and it's okay. Not everyone is ready for depth in every moment. The appropriate response is to honor their boundary and return to lighter conversation. You might say something like, "Fair enough, that's a big question," and move on. Forcing depth when someone isn't ready creates discomfort, not connection. The art is in offering the invitation and being okay with however they respond. Here's a final thought on questions that deepen connection. The most powerful questions are often the simplest ones, asked at the right moment with genuine care. Sometimes it's not about having a list of clever questions. Sometimes it's just about noticing something and asking about it. You seem quieter than usual today. What's on your mind? Or I noticed you light up when you talk about that. Tell me more. These spontaneous, observational questions can be more powerful than any pre-planned deep question because they show you're paying attention, you're present, you're noticing them. As we close this chapter, I want to leave you with a challenge. In your next meaningful conversation, practice asking one question more than you normally would before sharing your own experience. Just one. Notice what happens. Notice how the conversation goes deeper. Notice how the other person relaxes into the space you're creating. Notice how much more interesting the conversation becomes when you're genuinely curious rather than waiting to talk. And remember this, the questions you ask shape the life you live and the relationships you build. Surface questions create surface relationships. Deep questions create deep relationships. Curious questions make you see the world as endlessly interesting. Judgmental questions make you see the world as threatening. The quality of your questions literally determines the quality of your experience of being human. So ask better questions, my friend. Ask questions that matter. Ask questions that invite truth. Ask questions that say to the other person, "I see you. I'm curious about you. Your inner world matters to me." And watch how your relationships transform, how conversations that used to drain you start to energize you, how people start seeking you out because they feel truly heard in your presence. This is the art we're learning together. It's not about perfection, it's about practice. It's not about having the right questions memorized, it's about cultivating genuine curiosity. And you're doing it, right now, by being here, by being willing to learn, by caring enough about your relationships to do this work. That's beautiful. I see you. Keep going. Chapter 3, Charismatic Communication Techniques. Welcome back, dear friend. I'm so glad you're still with me on this journey. By now, you've learned how to create safety in conversations and ask questions that go beneath the surface. Today, we're going to explore something that many people think is either something you're born with or something you're not: charisma. But I'm here to tell you that charisma isn't magic, and it's not reserved for a lucky few. It's a set of learnable skills, and I'm going to teach them to you. Before we dive in, I want to reframe what charisma actually means. Most people think charisma is about being the loudest person in the room, the most entertaining, the one who commands attention. But that's not charisma. That's performance. Real charisma is about making others feel something positive when they're with you. It's about creating an energy field around yourself that draws people in, not because you're impressive, but because they feel more alive, more valued, more themselves when they're near you. Think about the most charismatic people you've known. I'm willing to bet they weren't necessarily the most beautiful, the most successful, or even the most intelligent. But they had something else. When you were with them, you felt good. You felt interesting. You felt seen. That's the kind of charisma we're cultivating here, not the flashy, performative kind, but the warm, magnetic kind that comes from genuine presence and skillful communication. I want you to know something important before we begin: you already have charisma within you. Every single person does. Charisma is simply your authentic self, expressed with confidence and warmth. What we're doing in this chapter isn't creating something new. We're removing the layers of self-consciousness, anxiety, and learned behaviors that have been blocking your natural magnetism. We're polishing the diamond that's already there. Tone, pacing, and warmth, the music of conversation. Let me tell you about Michael. He came to me because he kept getting feedback at work that he came across as cold and unapproachable, even though he genuinely cared about his colleagues. When I observed him in meetings, I immediately saw the problem. Michael's words were perfectly fine, professional, and appropriate. But his tone was flat, almost monotone. He spoke quickly, rushing through his thoughts. There was no warmth in his voice, no variation in his pacing. He sounded like someone reading a technical manual, not someone having a human conversation. We spent weeks working on what I call the music of conversation. Because that's what tone and pacing are, the melody beneath the words. You can say that's a great idea in a way that makes someone feel celebrated, or you can say the exact same words in a way that makes them feel patronized. The words are identical, but the music is completely different. Tone is about the quality of your voice, warm or cold, engaged or distant, genuine or performative. Think about how you talk to a beloved pet or a small child. Your voice naturally softens, becomes warmer, more animated. That's not fake. That's you accessing your natural warmth. Now, I'm not suggesting you talk to adults the way you talk to puppies. But I am suggesting that many of us have learned to suppress that natural warmth in professional or social settings, and in doing so, we've made ourselves less charismatic. Here's an exercise that changed everything for Michael. I had him record himself reading a simple sentence: "I appreciate your work on this project." First, he read it in his normal, flat tone. Then I asked him to imagine he was saying it to his best friend who'd just helped him move apartments. He read it again, and the difference was striking. His voice had warmth, genuine appreciation, energy. Same words, completely different impact. The revelation for Michael was that he already knew how to speak with warmth. He did it all the time with his friends and family. He just learned to suppress it in professional settings because he thought warmth wasn't professional. We worked on bringing that natural warmth back, not in an excessive or inappropriate way, but in a way that let people feel his genuine care and interest. Within a month, multiple colleagues mentioned that he seemed more approachable. His words hadn't changed, but his music had. Now let's talk about pacing. This is about the speed and rhythm of your speech. When you speak too quickly, people feel rushed, like you're in a hurry to get away from them. They can't fully process what you're saying, and they certainly can't respond thoughtfully. When you speak too slowly, people get impatient, their minds wander, you lose their attention. The sweet spot is somewhere in the middle, with intentional variation. Think about the best storytellers you know. They don't speak at a constant pace. They speed up during exciting parts, slow down for emphasis, pause for dramatic effect. They use pacing to create interest, to draw people in, to emphasize what matters. You can do the same thing in regular conversation. When you're sharing something important, slow down. Let each word land. When you're building toward a point, you can increase your pace slightly, creating a sense of momentum. Here's something powerful: the strategic pause. Most people are terrified of silence in conversation. The moment there's a pause, they rush to fill it with words, any words. But pauses are where meaning deepens. When you share something significant and then pause, you give the other person time to absorb it. When someone shares something with you and you pause before responding, you show them you're actually thinking about what they said, not just reacting. I worked with a woman named Elena who talked so quickly that people often asked her to repeat herself. She was intelligent and had interesting things to say, but her rapid-fire delivery made it hard for people to follow. We discovered that her speed came from anxiety. She was afraid of being boring, so she tried to get everything out as quickly as possible before people lost interest. Once we addressed the underlying anxiety and she learned to trust that her thoughts were worth people's time, her pacing naturally slowed. She started pausing between thoughts. And people started really hearing her for the first time. But here's the key to all of this: tone and pacing need to be authentic to you. I'm not asking you to put on a performance or adopt someone else's style. I'm asking you to remove whatever is blocking your natural expressiveness. Think about when you're most animated, most energized, most yourself. Maybe it's when you're talking about your passion, or when you're with your closest friends. That version of you, that's your natural charisma. The work is about letting that version show up more often, in more contexts. Warmth is perhaps the most important element of charismatic communication, and it's also the simplest. Warmth is conveyed through small things: a genuine smile, eye contact that lingers just a moment longer, a slight forward lean that shows interest, a tone that sounds like you're happy to be having this conversation. These tiny signals accumulate to create an overall impression of someone who is open, caring, and safe to be around. I love this quote from Maya Angelou that we touched on earlier, but it's worth repeating in this context: people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Tone, pacing, and warmth are how you make people feel. They're the emotional subtext beneath your words. Master them, and you become someone people want to be around, someone who makes others feel good simply by being present. Mirroring and emotional matching, the dance of connection. Now let's explore something fascinating from the world of neuroscience and psychology: mirroring. This is one of the most powerful charisma techniques you can learn, and the beautiful thing is, you're already doing it unconsciously. We're just going to make you more aware of it so you can use it intentionally. Mirroring is the natural human tendency to subtly match another person's body language, tone, and energy. When someone leans forward, you unconsciously lean forward. When someone speaks softly, you find yourself speaking softly too. This isn't manipulation, it's built into our nervous system. It's part of how we create rapport and show that we're on the same wavelength as someone else. Scientists have discovered something called mirror neurons in our brains. These neurons fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action. This is why when you watch someone stub their toe, you might wince. Why when someone smiles at you, you automatically smile back. These mirror neurons are the biological basis for empathy, and they're also the foundation of charismatic connection. Let me tell you about a time I saw mirroring work powerfully. I was at a coffee shop, watching two old friends reunite after years apart. As they talked, I noticed something beautiful. When one person leaned back and crossed their arms, within moments, the other did the same. When one leaned forward enthusiastically, the other mirrored that energy. When one spoke quietly and intimately, the other matched that tone. They were doing this completely unconsciously, and it created this gorgeous harmony. They were literally in sync, and you could see the connection deepening with every passing minute. Now, conscious mirroring is about doing this intentionally when it's not happening naturally. Maybe you're talking to someone who's very different from you, or maybe you're both nervous and your natural mirroring is disrupted. In these situations, gentle, subtle mirroring can help create rapport where it might not arise spontaneously. Here's how you do it: observe the other person's body language, tone, and energy level. Then, subtly match it. If they're sitting back in a relaxed posture, don't lean forward intensely into their space. If they're speaking quietly, don't boom your responses at them. If they're animated and enthusiastic, bring more energy to your own expression. You're essentially meeting them where they are, showing them on a subconscious level that you're similar, that you're safe, that you understand them. But here's the crucial caveat: this must be subtle and natural. If someone can tell you're deliberately mimicking them, it feels creepy and manipulative. The key is to lag your mirroring by a few seconds and to match their general energy without copying specific gestures. You're creating harmony, not performing a mime show. I remember working with a salesman named Tom who was struggling to connect with clients. He was energetic and enthusiastic, which worked great with some clients but completely put off others. I taught him about mirroring and energy matching. He learned to observe his clients first. Were they reserved or outgoing? Formal or casual? Fast-paced or deliberate? Then he would adjust his own style to be more in harmony with theirs. His sales numbers improved dramatically, not because he became a better salesman, but because he became better at creating connection. Now let's talk about emotional matching, which is related but slightly different. Emotional matching is about acknowledging and honoring the emotional state of the person you're talking to. If someone comes to you upset, and you respond with cheerful optimism, there's a mismatch that creates disconnection. They're in one emotional place, you're in another, and they feel unseen. This doesn't mean you have to feel exactly what they're feeling. If someone is anxious, you don't need to become anxious too. But you need to acknowledge their emotional reality and adjust your own energy accordingly. If someone is grieving, you bring gentle, quiet presence. If someone is excited, you bring celebratory energy. You're essentially saying, I see where you are emotionally, and I'm going to meet you there. I learned this lesson painfully. A friend called me once, really upset about losing her job. I immediately went into fix-it mode, telling her all the reasons this was actually a good thing, an opportunity for growth. I was trying to help, but I completely missed her emotional state. She needed someone to sit in the hard feelings with her first, to acknowledge that losing a job is scary and sad, before she could even think about opportunities. My emotional mismatching made her feel worse, not better. Here's the beautiful thing about emotional matching. When you match someone's emotional state first, you can then gently lead them to a different state. This is something therapists do all the time. If a client comes in anxious, the therapist first matches that anxiety, acknowledging it, sitting with it. Then, through their calm presence, they gradually help the client move toward calm. You start where they are, and then you guide them somewhere better. But you can't skip the first step. There's also something I call matching the speaking style. Some people are detail-oriented storytellers who need to give you the full context before getting to the point. Others are bottom-line communicators who want just the essential facts. When these two types talk to each other without awareness, frustration builds. The storyteller feels rushed and unheard. The bottom-liner feels impatient and bored. But when you can recognize someone's speaking style and match it, communication becomes effortless. With the storyteller, you settle in, ask questions, show interest in the details. With the bottom-liner, you get to the point quickly, keep it concise, respect their time. You're speaking their language, literally and figuratively, and that creates an immediate sense of being understood. Here's a practice for you: in your next conversation, spend the first few minutes just observing. What's this person's energy like? Fast or slow? High or low? What's their emotional state? Excited, worried, content, frustrated? What's their speaking style? And then, gently adjust yourself to be more in harmony with them. Notice how the quality of connection shifts. Notice how they relax, how the conversation flows more easily. The power of presence, being fully here. We've saved the most important for last: presence. This is the foundation that everything else is built on. Without presence, all the techniques in the world won't create genuine charisma. With presence, you barely need any techniques at all because people will naturally be drawn to the quality of attention you bring. Presence means being fully here, in this moment, with this person. It means your mind isn't wandering to your to-do list, you're not thinking about what you're going to say next, you're not distracted by your phone or your surroundings. You're here. Fully. Completely. And people can feel it. In our modern world, presence has become incredibly rare. Most people are physically present but mentally elsewhere, constantly distracted, perpetually multitasking. This means that when you offer someone your full presence, it's like water in a desert. It's extraordinary simply because it's so uncommon. Let me tell you about an experience I had with a monk I met at a retreat. We had a brief conversation, maybe 10 minutes long. But in those 10 minutes, I felt more seen, more heard, more understood than I had in months of conversations with friends and family. Why? Because this monk was completely present. When I spoke, I could feel his total attention on me. His eyes didn't wander. He didn't fidget. He wasn't thinking about what to say next. He was just there, with me, fully receiving whatever I offered. That conversation stayed with me for years because it showed me what true presence feels like. And I realized that this is what I wanted to offer other people. Not perfect words or clever insights, but complete presence. The gift of my full attention. Here's what presence actually requires: you have to let go of your agenda. Most of us enter conversations with an agenda, even if we're not aware of it. We want to be seen as smart, or funny, or helpful. We want to feel good about ourselves. We want something from the interaction. And all of these agendas, no matter how subtle, pull us out of presence and into performance. True presence means showing up without needing anything from the interaction except the interaction itself. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not trying to get anywhere. You're simply here, open and available, meeting this moment and this person exactly as they are. I worked with a therapist in training named Lisa who was struggling in her sessions. Her supervisor kept giving her feedback that she seemed distracted, not fully engaged with her clients. Lisa was confused because she was trying so hard, taking careful notes, thinking deeply about interventions. Then her supervisor said something that changed everything: stop trying to help them. Just be with them. Lisa realized she'd been so focused on being a good therapist that she'd forgotten to just be present with her clients as human beings. When Lisa let go of her agenda to help and simply practiced being present, her sessions transformed. Her clients opened up more. The therapeutic relationship deepened. Paradoxically, by trying less hard, she became more effective. That's the power of presence. Here's a practice that has profoundly changed my ability to be present. Before any important conversation, I take 30 seconds to ground myself. I take 3 deep breaths. I feel my feet on the floor. I set an intention. I'm going to be fully here for this conversation. That's it. Those 30 seconds create a boundary between whatever I was doing before and this moment now. They allow me to arrive, truly arrive, at the conversation. Another powerful practice: when you notice your mind wandering during a conversation, simply notice it without judgment and gently bring your attention back. This is exactly like meditation practice. Your mind will wander, that's normal and human. The practice is in noticing and returning, over and over again. Each time you bring yourself back to presence, you're strengthening that muscle. There's also a physical component to presence. Your body needs to communicate that you're here. This means putting your phone away, not just face down on the table where you can see it light up, but actually away. It means turning your body toward the person you're talking to. It means making soft, steady eye contact. It means nodding or making small sounds that show you're tracking with them. These physical signals of attention create a container that makes the other person feel safe to unfold. I learned something powerful from my grandmother. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when you were talking to her. I once asked her secret. She said, "I imagine that this might be the last conversation I ever have with this person. How would I listen if that were true?" That reframe completely changed how I approached conversations. If this were your last conversation with your child, your partner, your friend, would you check your phone? Would you let your mind wander? Would you interrupt? Of course not. You'd be fully, completely present, savoring every moment. Now, I know what you might be thinking, this sounds exhausting. I can't be that present all the time. And you're right. Presence requires energy. You can't be fully present in every single interaction all day long without burning out. But here's what I've learned: you don't need to be. 5 minutes of true presence is more valuable than an hour of distracted attention. It's better to have 3 deeply present conversations a day than 20 half-present ones. Choose your moments. When your child wants to tell you about their day, give them 5 minutes of complete presence instead of 30 minutes of partial attention while you're cooking dinner and checking your email. When your partner needs to talk, put down what you're doing and be fully there for 10 minutes. When a friend is going through something difficult, offer them the gift of your total presence for the length of the call. Quality over quantity, always. There's something almost spiritual about presence. When 2 people are both fully present with each other, something sacred happens. Time seems to slow down. The rest of the world fades away. There's a sense of deep connection, of really needing each other, soul to soul. These moments are rare in our distracted world, but they're available to us anytime we choose them. I want to share one final thought about charisma and presence. The most charismatic people I've ever known weren't trying to be charismatic. They were simply deeply present, genuinely warm, and authentically themselves. Their charisma was a byproduct of their quality of presence, not a goal they were striving for. This is important because when you're trying to be charismatic, you're in your head, self-monitoring, performing. But when you're simply present, warm, and authentic, charisma happens naturally. So here's your invitation for this chapter. Stop trying so hard. Stop performing. Stop worrying about whether you're interesting enough or saying the right things. Instead, practice being here. Practice matching the energy of the people you're with. Practice bringing warmth to your tone and intentionality to your pacing. Practice showing up fully, even if just for a few minutes at a time. Because here's the truth: people don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to be the most interesting person they've ever met. They need you to be present. They need to feel that when they're with you, they have your attention, your care, your genuine interest. That's what charisma really is. That's what creates the kind of magnetic presence that draws people in and makes them feel alive. You have everything you need to be charismatic already inside you. You just need to clear away the static, the self-consciousness, the trying. And what remains is your natural warmth, your authentic presence, your unique way of making others feel seen and valued. That's the charisma worth cultivating. That's the magnetism that lasts. Take a moment right now. Feel yourself here, in this moment, reading or listening to these words. Notice your breath. Notice your body. This is presence. This is where charisma lives. Not in the future where you're finally good enough at these techniques. Right here, right now, in your willingness to show up fully. You're already doing it. Keep going, my friend. You're becoming the person others feel good around, simply by being more fully yourself. Chapter 4: Guiding the Flow of Conversation. Hello again, dear friend. Welcome to Chapter 4. By now, you've learned how to create safety, ask deeper questions, and bring charismatic presence to your conversations. Today, we're going to explore something that feels almost like conducting an orchestra. How to guide the flow of conversation without controlling it, how to steer without dominating, how to keep things moving and meaningful without forcing anything. This is a delicate art, and I want to start by acknowledging something important. Many of us swing between 2 extremes in conversations. Either we're completely passive, letting the conversation drift wherever it goes, often ending up in uncomfortable silences or meaningless small talk. Or we're overly controlling, dominating the conversation, steering it so forcefully toward our own interests that the other person feels steamrolled. Neither extreme creates the kind of flowing, organic, mutually engaging conversation we're aiming for. What we're learning here is the middle path. It's about having enough confidence and skill to gently guide a conversation toward depth and meaning, while remaining flexible enough to follow where the other person wants to go. It's about being an active participant in shaping the conversation without making it all about you. Think of it like dancing with a partner. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, and the best moments are when you're so in sync that it's hard to tell who's doing which. I remember watching my friend Caroline at a dinner party once. She had this incredible gift for keeping conversations engaging. Topics would start to peter out, and she'd introduce a new thread that everyone found interesting. Someone would begin to monopolize the conversation, and she'd gently redirect to include others. Awkward silences would start to form, and she'd bridge them so naturally that you barely noticed. I asked her afterward how she did it, and she said something I've never forgotten: "I think of myself as a gardener, not a director. I'm not controlling what grows, I'm just creating conditions for good things to flourish." That's what this chapter is about. Becoming a conversational gardener, creating conditions for meaningful exchange to flourish while respecting the organic nature of how humans connect. How to steer without dominating. Let's start with the most challenging part. How do you influence the direction of a conversation without taking it over? This requires a combination of confidence and humility, assertion and receptivity. It's about having opinions and preferences while holding them lightly enough that you can let them go if the conversation wants to go somewhere else. I worked with a man named Daniel who came to me frustrated. He said that in social situations, conversations always seemed shallow and boring, and he didn't know how to make them more interesting without coming across as pretentious or domineering. As we talked, I realized Daniel had interesting thoughts and questions, but he was either staying completely silent or, when he did speak up, he'd launch into long monologues that shut down the collaborative nature of conversation. We worked on what I call conversational nudges instead of conversational takeovers. A nudge is a gentle suggestion, an invitation, a possibility offered rather than imposed. Instead of Daniel saying, "You know what we should talk about?" The ethics of artificial intelligence, which feels like a lecture waiting to happen, he learned to say things like, "Has anyone been following the AI developments lately? I've been thinking about the ethical implications." Same interest, completely different energy. The first version controls, the second version invites. Here's the key distinction: steering is about opening doors, while dominating is about pushing people through them. When you steer, you offer a direction, but you remain open to other possibilities. When you dominate, you've already decided where the conversation should go, and you're determined to get there regardless of anyone else's interest or energy. Let me give you some practical language for gentle steering. Instead of "Let's talk about X," try "I'm curious about X, what do you think?" Instead of "That's not as important as Y," try "That makes me think of Y, which is related." Instead of "Anyway, back to what I was saying," try "That's interesting, and it connects to something you mentioned earlier about." See the difference? You're suggesting, connecting, inviting, not commanding. I learned a powerful technique from a mediator I once worked with. She called it the bridge statement. When you want to shift a conversation to a new topic or redirect it slightly, you first acknowledge what's been said, then build a bridge to where you want to go. It sounds like this: "That's a really important point about workplace culture. It actually makes me wonder about something related: how do we balance productivity with well-being?" You've honored the current topic and created a natural pathway to a new one. There's also an art to knowing when to steer and when to follow. If someone is really engaged with a topic, if they're animated and passionate, that's usually not the time to redirect unless the conversation has become genuinely problematic. Your job is to lean into their enthusiasm, ask questions that deepen their exploration, and let them flourish. But if energy is flagging, if the topic has been exhausted, if people are starting to disengage, that's when a gentle steer can revitalize the conversation. I remember a conversation with a group of friends where someone started talking about a TV show none of us had watched. The conversation started to die as he described episode details. Instead of letting awkward silence build or letting him continue to a disengaged audience, I used a bridge. "That sounds like a really well-written show. It makes me think about how we all have different ways of unwinding after work. What does everyone here do to decompress?" Suddenly, everyone was engaged again because the topic had shifted to something we all had experience with, but I'd done it without making the original speaker feel dismissed. Here's something crucial. When you steer a conversation, your motivation matters. Are you redirecting because you're genuinely trying to create more engagement and depth, or because you're bored and want to talk about your interests? People can sense the difference, even if they can't articulate it. Steering that comes from service to the conversation creates connection. Steering that comes from self-interest creates resentment. There's also the matter of knowing when not to steer at all. Some of the best conversations are ones where you simply create space and let them unfold organically. If you're always directing, always nudging, always managing, the conversation loses its spontaneity and magic. Sometimes the best thing you can do is ask a good question and then get out of the way, trusting that wherever the conversation goes will be exactly where it needs to go. I want to share a personal story. Early in my career, I had a habit of steering every conversation toward topics I found intellectually interesting. I thought I was making conversations better, deeper, more meaningful. But a close friend finally told me that sometimes she just wanted to chat about everyday stuff, that not every conversation needed to be profound, and that my constant steering toward important topics made her feel like casual conversation with me wasn't valued. That feedback stung, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. I learned that steering isn't about imposing your values about what makes a good conversation. It's about reading the room and serving the collective energy and needs of everyone present. Topic branching, creating natural transitions. Now let's talk about topic branching, which is one of the most elegant ways to keep conversations flowing and interesting. Topic branching is the art of finding natural connection points between subjects, allowing conversations to evolve organically from one theme to another without jarring transitions. Think of conversation as a tree. You start with a trunk, the initial topic. But from that trunk, branches naturally grow. And from those branches, smaller branches, and so on. Good conversationalists are skilled at recognizing these natural branch points and exploring them, rather than staying rigidly on the main trunk or jumping randomly between unrelated topics. Let me illustrate this with an example. Someone mentions they just got back from Italy. A clumsy conversationalist might respond by immediately talking about their own trip to Spain, which is a topic jump, not a branch. A slightly better conversationalist might ask questions about Italy, staying on the main trunk. But a skilled conversationalist sees the branching possibilities. They might branch into travel philosophy, what draws you to travel, into Italian culture, what surprised you most about the culture, into the experience of being away from routine, how does it feel to come back to regular life after a trip? Or into any number of other directions that honor what was shared while exploring new territory. The key to good branching is that each new direction should feel connected to what came before. There should be a logical thread, even if subtle, that links one topic to the next. This creates a sense of conversational coherence. People feel like the conversation is going somewhere, even if they couldn't predict where, rather than ping-ponging randomly between unrelated subjects. I learned this technique from journalists who are masters at topic branching. They start with one question, but based on the answer, they find an interesting thread and pull on it, which leads to another thread, and another. The conversation unfolds like a story, with each revelation naturally leading to the next question. You can do the same thing in regular conversation. Here's a practical approach: listen for the most emotionally alive part of what someone just said. That's usually where the richest branch point is. If someone says, "I went to Italy and saw the Colosseum and ate great food and my hotel room was tiny," you might notice they lit up when talking about the food. That's your branch point. Tell me about the food. What was the best thing you ate? They'll probably have a story there, and that story will offer its own branch points to explore. Topic branching also helps when a conversation starts to feel stuck or repetitive. Instead of continuing to mine the same topic or abruptly changing subjects, you look for a natural branch. Someone's talking about stress at work? You might branch to work-life balance, or to what they do to manage stress, or to what their ideal work situation would look like. Each of these is connected to the original topic but opens up new territory to explore. I worked with a woman named Rachel who felt like her conversations always stayed superficial. As we examined her conversational patterns, I noticed she was staying too rigidly on the main trunk of topics. Someone would mention their job, and she'd ask more questions about their job, and more questions about their job, until the topic was exhausted and an awkward silence would fall. She wasn't recognizing the natural branch points that could have taken the conversation deeper or in more interesting directions. We practiced together. Someone mentions they're a teacher. Instead of just asking more questions about teaching, Rachel learned to listen for branches. What made you want to become a teacher? Branches into values and calling. What's the most rewarding part? Branches into meaning and purpose. How has teaching changed you? Branches into personal growth. Suddenly, Rachel's conversations became much richer because she was exploring the branches, not just the trunk. Here's another powerful aspect of topic branching. It shows that you're really listening. When you can find a natural connection between what someone just said and a new direction to explore, it demonstrates that you absorbed their words deeply enough to see the implications and possibilities within them. This makes people feel heard in a profound way. But there's also an art to knowing when a branch isn't working. Sometimes you'll suggest a new direction and you can feel that it doesn't have energy, people aren't interested, the conversation feels forced. That's okay. You simply acknowledge it and branch in a different direction or return to the main trunk. Or maybe not, what were you saying about? This flexibility, this willingness to experiment and adjust, is what makes conversations feel alive rather than scripted. I love what improvisational theater teaches about this. In improv, there's a principle called yes, and. You accept what your scene partner offers and build on it. Topic branching in conversation works the same way. Someone offers something, you accept it and add to it, finding the next natural development. It's collaborative creativity, building something together that neither of you could have built alone. Handling pauses, dips, and transitions. Now let's talk about one of the most anxiety-inducing aspects of conversation, silence. Most people panic when a pause happens. They rush to fill it with any words, any topic, just to make the discomfort stop. But here's what I want you to understand: not all silence is bad. In fact, some silence is sacred. There are different types of pauses in conversation, and learning to distinguish between them is crucial. There's the comfortable pause, where both people are simply resting, reflecting, being together in companionable silence. There's the pregnant pause, full of unspoken emotion or thought, right before someone shares something vulnerable. There's the awkward pause, where connection has been lost and tension is building. And there's the natural ending pause, where a topic has run its course and it's time to transition to something new. The comfortable pause and the pregnant pause should be honored, not rushed to fill. These pauses are where depth happens. I learned this from a therapist friend who told me that often, the most important things her clients say come right after a long silence. They need time to find the courage, to find the words, to access what's true. If she jumped in too quickly to fill the silence, she'd rob them of the opportunity to share what really matters. I remember a conversation with my father, late at night on his porch. We'd been talking about life, about regrets, about time passing. At one point, the conversation paused. My instinct was to fill the silence, to ask another question. But something made me just sit with him in the quiet. After maybe 30 seconds, he said, "I wish I'd told you more often that I'm proud of you." If I'd filled that silence, I would have missed one of the most meaningful things he ever said to me. So how do you know which type of pause you're in? You feel it. I know that's frustrating because it's not a rule I can give you, but it's true. A comfortable or pregnant pause feels full, even though it's silent. There's still connection, still energy between you. An awkward pause feels empty and tense. The connection has been lost. You can usually see it in body language too. In a good pause, people are still oriented toward each other, relaxed. In an awkward pause, people start to look away, fidget, become physically uncomfortable. For awkward pauses, the ones where connection has been lost, you do want to bridge them. But you want to do it skillfully, not desperately. A desperate bridge sounds like, "So, weather's been crazy, huh?" A skillful bridge acknowledges the pause without making it weird. "I'm trying to think of how to put this." Or, "That's given me something to think about." Or even just, "Where should we go from here?" These bridges are honest and natural, and they give both of you permission to transition to something new. There's also what I call the conversational dip, which is different from a pause. A dip is when the energy of a conversation starts to decline, when engagement is fading, when you can feel everyone starting to check out mentally. This happens naturally in longer conversations. Energy ebbs and flows. The key is recognizing the dip and knowing how to revitalize the conversation. One powerful way to handle a dip is to shift the mode of conversation. If you've been talking about serious topics, maybe it's time for something lighter. If you've been sharing stories, maybe it's time to shift to ideas or questions. If you've been talking about the past, maybe shift to the future. If the conversation has been abstract, may be grounded with a specific example or personal story. These modal shifts can inject new energy into a flagging conversation. I facilitate a monthly dinner conversation group, and I've become quite skilled at reading dips. I can feel when a topic has been exhausted, even if people are still politely engaging with it. When I sense a dip, I might say something like, "This has been such a rich discussion. I want to shift gears a bit." Who has something completely different they've been thinking about lately? This gives everyone permission to let go of the current topic without anyone feeling like they failed to keep it interesting. Another technique for handling dips is what I call the vulnerability injection. When a conversation is losing energy and staying on the surface, sometimes sharing something real and vulnerable can suddenly deepen it again. You might say, "Can I share something I've been struggling with?" Or, "I want to get your take on something that's been on my mind." Vulnerability creates invitation for others to match your depth, and suddenly the conversation has energy again. Transitions between topics can be either smooth or jarring, and the difference matters more than you might think. Jarring transitions disrupt flow and create micro-disconnections. Smooth transitions maintain the sense of collaboration and continuity. The difference usually comes down to whether you're acknowledging what was just discussed before moving on. A jarring transition sounds like this: Person A is sharing about their challenges with their teenage daughter, and Person B responds, "That reminds me, did you see the game last night?" There's no acknowledgement, no bridge, just an abrupt shift. Person A feels unheard, even if Person B didn't intend that. A smooth transition honors what came before while opening new territory. That sounds really challenging with your daughter. I hope you find a way through it. Totally different topic, but did you catch the game last night? The acknowledgement only takes a second, but it makes all the difference in whether Person A feels dismissed or simply like the conversation is naturally evolving. I learned about transition skills from a radio host I admire. She moves between topics, between interviews, between serious and light, all day long. She taught me that the key to good transitions is using bridge language that signals you're shifting on a different note. Or, "This makes me think of something else." Or, "Shifting gears for a moment." Or, "Before we move on, I want to acknowledge." These simple phrases prepare the listener for a change, making transitions feel intentional rather than abrupt. Here's something important about handling dips and difficult moments in conversation. Sometimes the best thing you can do is name what's happening. If a conversation has become awkward or stuck, sometimes just saying, "This conversation feels like it's gotten a bit stuck, doesn't it?" can release the tension and allow everyone to reset. Or if energy is low, "I feel like we're losing steam here, should we take a break or shift to something else?" Naming the dynamic gives everyone permission to adjust without pretending everything is fine. I facilitated a difficult conversation once between two colleagues who had conflict. The conversation kept hitting walls, circling the same issues without progress. Finally, I said, I notice we keep coming back to this same point. I wonder if there's something underneath it we haven't named yet. That observation, that naming of the pattern, actually helped them access a deeper layer of what was really going on. Sometimes naming the process is the most helpful intervention. Putting it all together, the flow state. When you master these skills, steering without dominating, branching naturally between topics, handling pauses and transitions with grace, something magical happens. Conversations start to feel less like work and more like play. You enter what I call conversational flow state, where you're not thinking about what to do or say next, you're simply responding intuitively to what's happening in the moment. In flow state, you're simultaneously relaxed and alert. You're not controlling the conversation, but you're actively shaping it. You're following your genuine curiosity while also being aware of the other person's engagement and energy. You're contributing your own thoughts and experiences while making space for theirs. It's a state of effortless effort, where your skills have become so integrated that they're no longer techniques you're applying but simply how you naturally show up. I experience this most often in conversations where both people are skilled at guiding flow. We're both offering and receiving, steering and following, initiating and responding. The conversation feels like a jazz improvisation, where each person is listening deeply and building on what the other offers, creating something neither could have created alone. These conversations are deeply satisfying because they feel collaborative, creative, alive. Here's what I want you to understand. Learning to guide conversational flow isn't about control. It's about service. You're serving the conversation itself, serving the connection between you and the other person, serving the highest possibility of what this exchange could be. When you approach it from that orientation, from service rather than control, everything shifts. You're not trying to look good or be impressive. You're trying to create conditions where something real and meaningful can happen. I'll leave you with a practice. In your next conversation, set an intention to be a conversational gardener. Notice where energy is and isn't. Notice when a topic is flourishing and when it's wilting. Notice when someone wants to go deeper and when they want to lighten up. Notice the natural branch points and follow one or two. Notice the pauses and let some of them breathe. Notice the dips and gently revitalize them. And notice how it feels to participate in shaping a conversation without controlling it, to guide without dominating, to be an active co-creator of meaningful exchange. You're learning something profound here, how to be in collaborative relationship with the organic unfolding of human connection. This skill will serve you in every area of your life, because life itself is a flowing conversation between you and everything around you. As you learn to guide without forcing, to steer without controlling, to shape while remaining flexible, you're not just becoming a better conversationalist. You're becoming more skilled at the art of living itself. And that's the real gift of this work. Every conversation is practice for how to be in relationship with life, present, flexible, engaged, responsive, willing to lead and willing to follow, contributing while remaining open, shaping while surrendering. This is the dance, my friend. And you're learning the steps beautifully. Keep practicing. Keep noticing. Keep showing up with the intention to serve the conversation rather than dominate it. That's where the magic lives. Chapter 5, The Skill of Making People Feel Important. Introduction, The Invisible Currency of Human Connection. There's something magical that happens when someone makes you feel truly seen. Not just noticed, but seen. As if your presence matters, your thoughts carry weight, and your existence adds something valuable to the world. We've all experienced both sides of this equation. We remember the teacher who believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. We recall the stranger at the coffee shop who complimented our shoes and somehow made our entire morning brighter. And equally, we remember the people who made us feel invisible, insignificant, like background noise in their important lives. Here's what most people don't realize: making others feel important isn't about grand gestures or fake flattery. It's a skill, a learnable, practicable skill that can transform every relationship you have. Your friendships will deepen. Your romantic connections will strengthen. Even your professional networks will flourish in ways you never imagined. And the beautiful secret? When you master this skill, you don't just change other people's lives. you fundamentally change your own. In this chapter, we're going to explore 3 powerful concepts that will revolutionize how you connect with people. We'll discuss the spotlight effect reversal, conversational generosity, and how to give compliments that feel genuinely meaningful rather than hollow and manipulative. By the end, you'll have a complete toolkit for making every person you encounter feel valued, appreciated, and genuinely important. Let me start with a confession. For years, I thought I was pretty good with people. I could hold conversations. I had friends. I wasn't socially awkward. But I'll never forget the day my perspective completely shifted. I was at a networking event, chatting with a woman named Sarah about her marketing startup. Or rather, I was waiting to chat about my consulting business while she happened to be talking. I nodded at the right moments. I made appropriate listening sounds. But inside? I was rehearsing my own stories, planning my own anecdotes, calculating when I could steer the conversation back to my achievements. Then Sarah stopped mid-sentence and said something I'll never forget. "You know what? I can tell you're not really here." She wasn't angry. Just honest. And she was absolutely right. That moment of uncomfortable truth launched me on a journey to understand what it really means to make people feel important. Not as a manipulation tactic. Not as a networking strategy. But as a fundamental way of moving through the world that honors the humanity in everyone you meet. So let's begin. Part 1: The Spotlight Effect Reversal. Understanding our natural bias. Let me ask you something. When you walk into a room full of people, where is your attention focused? If you're like most humans, you're probably thinking about yourself. How do I look? Did I say something awkward? Are people judging my outfit? Do they think I'm interesting? Am I talking too much or too little? Psychologists call this the spotlight effect, our tendency to believe we're at the center of everyone else's attention, as if a giant spotlight follows us around, illuminating our every flaw and awkward moment. Research by Thomas Gilovich at Cornell University shows that we dramatically overestimate how much others notice our appearance, behaviors, and mistakes. In one famous study, students wearing embarrassing t-shirts thought half the room would notice their shirt. In reality, fewer than a quarter of people did. Here's the profound truth: everyone else is too busy worrying about their own spotlight to notice yours very much. But here's where it gets interesting. What if we deliberately reversed this spotlight? What if, instead of worrying about how we appear in others' eyes, we turned our full attention to making them feel seen, valued, and important? This is the spotlight effect reversal. It's the conscious decision to take the spotlight off yourself and shine it brightly on the person in front of you. The psychological power of being noticed. Before we discuss how to implement this reversal, let's understand why it matters so deeply. Abraham Maslow, in his hierarchy of needs, placed esteem, the need to feel valued and respected, just below self-actualization. Humans have a fundamental psychological need to feel important. Not superior to others, but significant, meaningful, worthy of attention and respect. When someone meets this need in us, something powerful happens neurologically. Our brains release oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. We feel warmth toward that person. Trust builds almost instantly. We become more open, more generous, more willing to connect. It's not manipulation, it's basic human psychology. Think about the last time someone really listened to you. Not the fake listening where they're clearly waiting for their turn to talk, but genuine, full presence listening. How did that feel? Didn't you leave that conversation feeling somehow lighter, more energized, more positive about yourself and the world? That's the gift you can give to every person you meet. Practicing the reversal, concrete techniques. So how do we actually do this? How do we flip that spotlight? Technique 1: the first 5 seconds. When you first encounter someone, resist the urge to immediately think about what you'll say. Instead, take the first 5 seconds to simply observe them with genuine curiosity. Notice something specific, not just they seem nice but actual details. The excitement in their voice when they mention their dog. The pride when they talk about their daughter's graduation. The way their eyes light up when discussing their favorite book. These 5 seconds of genuine observation do something remarkable. They take you out of your head and into the present moment. They transform you from a performer worried about your lines into a witness genuinely interested in another human being. Technique 2, the memory technique. Here's a simple practice that will change your relationships. Remember details. Not in a creepy, database management way, but in a you matter enough for me to pay attention way. When someone mentions they're nervous about a presentation next Thursday, put a note in your phone. Follow up on Friday, hey, how did that presentation go? When a colleague mentions their son is trying out for the basketball team, remember to ask about it the following week. Why is this so powerful? Because it communicates something profound. You are important enough that I held space in my mind for your concerns, your hopes, your life. In our distracted, overstimulated world, this kind of attention is extraordinarily rare and therefore extraordinarily valuable. Technique 3, the curiosity question. Most conversations follow predictable scripts. How are you? Fine, you? Good, thanks. It's social autopilot. Instead, try asking genuine curiosity questions. Not interrogation questions, but questions that communicate. I'm genuinely interested in understanding you. Instead of, what do you do? Try what's something you're working on that excites you right now. Instead of, how was your weekend? Try, what was the best part of your weekend? Notice the difference? These questions invite people to share what matters to them, not just recite facts about their lives. The transformation, a real example. Let me share a story about Marcus, a client of mine who struggled with networking. He dreaded industry events, felt awkward at parties, and generally believed he was bad with people. His strategy was to prepare impressive stories about his accomplishments, rehearse witty remarks, and try to appear confident and interesting. It wasn't working. He'd leave events feeling exhausted and disconnected, wondering why others seemed to form genuine connections while he just collected business cards. We worked on the spotlight reversal. I gave him one simple assignment for the next networking event: don't try to be interesting. Try to be interested. At the next conference, Marcus approached a woman standing alone near the refreshments table. Instead of launching into his rehearsed introduction, he simply said, I always feel a bit awkward at these things. Do you? She laughed with relief. Oh my God, yes. I've been pretending to check my phone for 10 minutes. They both laughed. Then Marcus asked, so what actually brought you here? Like, beyond the professional obligation? What followed was a 40-minute conversation. Marcus learned about her passion for sustainable architecture, her frustration with industry trends toward cost-cutting that sacrificed quality, and her dream of starting her own firm. Marcus asked questions. He listened. He remembered details. He was genuinely curious. At the end, she said something remarkable. You know what? You're one of the most interesting people I've met in years. Marcus had barely talked about himself. Here's the paradox: when you make others feel important by being genuinely interested in them, they find you interesting. They remember you. They want to connect with you. Your spotlight reversal actually makes you shine brighter. Part 2, Conversational Generosity. What is conversational generosity? Imagine conversations as an economy. In most exchanges, people are constantly negotiating. Often unconsciously, for resources like attention, validation, and significance. Person A shares a story about their vacation. Person B immediately counters with their own, better vacation story. Person A mentions a challenge at work. Person B jumps in with advice before Person A has even finished describing the problem. We've all been on both sides of these transactions. And they leave us feeling vaguely unsatisfied, as if we went to a restaurant and never quite got the meal we ordered. Conversational generosity flips this economic model. Instead of viewing conversation as a negotiation or competition, you approach it as a gift economy. Your goal isn't to extract value, attention, admiration, validation, but to give value freely, with no expectation of return. This sounds simple, even obvious. But implementing it requires overcoming some deeply ingrained conversational habits. The 4 enemies of conversational generosity. Enemy 1, the conversation hijacker. You've met this person. Someone shares a story about their difficult day, and before they finish, the hijacker jumps in, "Oh, that reminds me of when I..." And suddenly, the conversation is about them. Here's the uncomfortable truth: we all do this. Not because we're selfish monsters, but because we're trying to show empathy by relating. I understand your experience because I had a similar one. Our intentions are good. Our impact is not. When you hijack a conversation, even with the best intentions, you send an unintended message: your experience is just a launching pad for my story, which is more important. Enemy 2, the advice machine. Someone shares a problem. Before they've fully expressed their feelings, you jump in with solutions. Have you tried this? You should definitely do that. Here's what I would do. Again, good intentions. We want to help. We want to fix. But often, people aren't looking for solutions. They're looking to be heard. They need someone to witness their struggle, to validate their feelings, to simply say, "That sounds really hard." The advice machine, though well-meaning, communicates, "Your feelings aren't as important as my solutions." Enemy 3, the one-upper. This is perhaps the most toxic enemy of conversational generosity. Someone shares an accomplishment, and the one-upper immediately tops it. Someone shares a struggle, and the one-upper had it worse. You think your commute is bad? Try living in Los Angeles. You ran a 5K? I just finished my 3rd marathon. The one-upper isn't even aware they're doing it. They think they're participating in the conversation. But what they're actually doing is devaluing the other person's experience by constantly positioning their own as more significant. Enemy 4, the distracted listener. In our smartphone-saturated world, this might be the most common enemy. Someone is talking to you, and you're sort of listening, but you're also checking your phone, watching the TV in the background, thinking about your to-do list, planning what you'll say next. Partial attention has become normalized. But it sends a devastating message: you're not interesting enough to deserve my full presence. Practicing conversational generosity, the 5 principles. Principle 1, listen to understand, not to respond. Most of us listen with one ear while using the other to prepare our response. We're waiting for our turn, not truly hearing. Try this: when someone is speaking, give yourself permission to not think about what you'll say next. Just listen. Absorb. Understand. Trust that when they finish, something appropriate will come to you. And you know what? It always does. When you're fully present, your responses are actually more thoughtful and relevant than when you pre-script them. Principle 2, ask follow-up questions. This is conversational gold. When someone shares something, ask them to tell you more. Dig deeper. Show that you're not just tolerating their story as a prelude to yours, you're genuinely interested in understanding theirs. How did that make you feel? What happened next? What was going through your mind when that happened? These follow-up questions do something remarkable. They give the other person permission to elaborate, to explore their own thoughts more deeply, to feel fully heard. Principle 3, validate before you advise. If someone shares a problem and you genuinely have helpful advice, that's wonderful. But first, validate their experience. That sounds incredibly frustrating. I can understand why you'd feel that way. That must have been so disappointing. Only after validating should you ask. Would you like to brainstorm some solutions, or do you just need to vent? This simple question gives them agency and shows respect for what they actually need in the moment. Principle 4, resist the urge to relate. This is hard. When someone shares an experience, our natural instinct is to share our similar experience. And sometimes, this is fine, it can build connection. But practice restraint. If you do share a related story, keep it brief and always return focus to them. Oh, something similar happened to me last year. It was so stressful. Is that how you're feeling too? See how quickly we return the spotlight to them? Better yet, share a related experience only after they've fully explored theirs, and only if it genuinely serves to deepen the conversation, not to shift focus. Principle 5. Give the gift of presence. Put your phone away. Turn off the TV. Close the laptop. Give whoever you're with the rare and precious gift of your full, undivided attention. In a world of constant distraction, your complete presence is one of the most valuable gifts you can offer. People will remember how you made them feel more than what you said. The ripple effect, how generosity returns. Here's the beautiful paradox of conversational generosity: when you give freely without expectation, you receive far more than you could have extracted through conversational competition. People feel safe with you. They trust you. They open up in ways they don't with others. Your relationships deepen. Opportunities emerge organically because people genuinely want to connect with you, collaborate with you, support you. I learned this from my friend David, who is one of the most magnetically likable people I know. He's not particularly charismatic in the traditional sense. He's not the loudest person in the room. He doesn't tell the funniest jokes or the most impressive stories. But people adore him. And I finally understood why when I watched him at a dinner party. For 2 hours, David asked questions, laughed at others' stories, remembered details from previous conversations, and showed genuine interest in everyone's lives. He shared a bit about himself when asked, but always briefly, and always returned focus to others. At the end of the night, multiple people told him, "You're such a great conversationalist." He'd barely talked about himself. That's the power of conversational generosity. Part 3. Compliments that feel genuine. Why most compliments fall flat. We've all received compliments that felt hollow. Nice shirt. Good job. You look great. They're pleasant enough, but they don't really land. They feel automatic, like social lubricant rather than genuine appreciation. And we've all given these kinds of compliments too. We know we should say something nice, so we toss out a generic pleasantry and move on. But occasionally, you receive a compliment that genuinely touches you. That you remember. That shifts something in how you see yourself. What makes the difference? Genuine compliments have 3 key characteristics: specificity, unexpectedness, and connection to character rather than just appearance or achievements. The anatomy of a genuine compliment. Element 1: Specificity. Generic: you're a good writer. Specific: the way you described that sunset in your essay, the sky blushed like it was keeping a secret. That image has stayed with me for weeks. See the difference? The specific compliment shows that you actually paid attention. You noticed something particular. You were genuinely impacted. Specificity transforms a compliment from a social nicety into real recognition. It says, "I see you." Not just the general outline of you, but the specific, unique ways you show up in the world. Element 2: Unexpectedness. We expect compliments on the things we're already confident about. The conventionally attractive person expects to hear they're good-looking. The successful executive expects to hear their presentation was great. But when you notice and appreciate something unexpected, especially something the person values but doesn't often get recognized for, the impact is profound. The successful executive who's always complimented on their strategic thinking? Tell them, "You know what I really appreciate about you? The way you checked in with Sarah after the meeting. You could tell she was struggling with the new project timeline, and you took time to ask how she was doing." That kind of attentiveness to your team is rare at your level. Suddenly, they feel seen in a new way. You've appreciated something deeper than their obvious strengths, you've recognized their character. Element 3: Character over superficiality. There's nothing wrong with complimenting someone's appearance or achievements. But these compliments are common. What's rare is recognizing someone's character, their values, the way they show up in the world. Instead of, "You're so smart." Try, "I really admire how you approach problems." You're not afraid to say "I don't know," and then you ask really thoughtful questions until you understand. That kind of intellectual humility is something I want to cultivate more in myself. This compliment does several things simultaneously. It recognizes a specific character trait. It explains why you value that trait. And it shows that their behavior has actually influenced and inspired you. That's powerful. The 3-layer compliment framework. Here's a practical framework I use for giving compliments that feel genuine and meaningful. Layer 1, the observation. Start with something specific you noticed. Not a judgment, just an observation. "I noticed that when that customer was upset earlier, you stayed so calm." Layer 2, the impact. Explain how that observation affected you or others. "Watching how you handled that, I felt myself relax. Your steadiness actually helped me stay calm too, and I think it helped the customer feel heard rather than defensive." Layer 3, the character connection. Connect the observation to a character trait or value. That kind of grace under pressure, it's not just a skill, it's really who you are. It's one of the things I most appreciate about working with you. Notice how this 3-layer approach transforms a simple compliment into something much more meaningful. You're not just saying "good job." You're recognizing their specific behavior, sharing its impact, and connecting it to their deeper character. The timing and context of compliments. Great compliments are like good comedy, timing matters. Public versus private. Some people love public recognition. Others find it mortifying. Pay attention to the individual. For those who seem uncomfortable with public praise, save your compliments for one-on-one moments. For those who light up when recognized in front of others, occasional public appreciation can be powerful. But here's a good rule: private appreciation is almost always safe and meaningful. Immediate versus delayed. Immediate compliments have spontaneity and freshness. "That comment you just made in the meeting was brilliant, it completely shifted how I was thinking about the problem." But delayed compliments have their own power. They show that something stuck with you, that it mattered enough to remember. "You know that conversation we had last month about handling difficult clients? I used your advice yesterday, and it completely changed the outcome. I've been meaning to tell you, thank you." Every day versus special occasions. Don't save all your compliments for annual reviews or birthdays. The most meaningful appreciation often comes in ordinary moments, for ordinary actions that reveal extraordinary character. A warning: avoiding manipulative compliments. Let's be clear about something: genuine compliments are not a manipulation tactic. If you're giving compliments because you want something in return, people will sense it. We're all equipped with surprisingly good authenticity detectors. The techniques in this chapter only work if your motivation is genuinely to make others feel valued and appreciated. If you're trying to use compliments to get promoted, make sales, or manipulate people into liking you, it will backfire. People will sense the transaction, and they'll mistrust you. The foundation of making people feel important is actually believing that people are important. That every person you meet has inherent worth and dignity. That their experiences matter. That their presence in the world adds something valuable. If you don't genuinely believe this, no technique will help you. But if you do believe it, or if you're willing to practice believing it, these skills will help you express that belief in ways that genuinely connect and uplift. Conclusion: the transformation ahead. Making people feel important is not about being fake or subordinating yourself. It's not about flattery or manipulation. It's about recognizing a fundamental truth. We're all walking through this world hoping to matter, hoping to be seen, hoping that our presence makes some kind of positive difference. When you master the 3 skills we've explored, the spotlight effect reversal, conversational generosity, and genuine compliments, you give people something rare and precious. You give them the experience of being truly seen, heard, and valued. And here's what I've discovered. When you commit to making others feel important, something unexpected happens to you. Your anxiety in social situations decreases because you're no longer focused on performing or being impressive. Your relationships deepen because people trust you with their real selves. Your influence expands because people genuinely want to support someone who supported them so generously. And perhaps most surprisingly, you feel more important yourself. Not in an ego-inflated way, but in a deeply grounded way. You discover that you have something genuinely valuable to offer the world: your attention, your appreciation, your recognition of others' worth. This is not a small thing. In our distracted, disconnected world, the ability to make others feel truly seen and valued is a revolutionary act of kindness. So here's your invitation: for the next week, practice one of these skills daily. Turn your spotlight onto someone else. Practice conversational generosity in your next difficult conversation. Give one specific, genuine compliment to someone who wouldn't expect it. Notice what happens. Notice how people respond. Notice how you feel. My prediction? You'll discover that making others feel important is actually one of the most important things you can do, not just for them, but for yourself, and for the kind of world we all want to live in. A world where people feel seen, valued, important. It starts with you. Today. In your very next conversation. Are you ready? Conclusion: becoming someone everyone loves talking to. Introduction: the person you're becoming. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this: you walk into a room, and people genuinely light up when they see you. Not because you're the loudest, the funniest, or the most impressive person there. But because in your presence, they feel more themselves. More relaxed. More valued. More seen. This isn't fantasy. This isn't reserved for the naturally charismatic or the genetically blessed extroverts. This is entirely within your reach, and you've already begun the journey simply by engaging with the ideas in this book. But here's what I need you to understand: reading about these concepts and occasionally applying them when you remember isn't enough. The real transformation happens when you fundamentally rewire your conversational identity, when you develop genuine confidence through connection rather than performance, and when you embrace a final mindset shift that changes everything about how you move through the world. That's what this conclusion is about. Not a summary of what we've covered, but a roadmap for integration. For becoming someone who doesn't just know these principles but embodies them so naturally that people can't quite put their finger on why they love talking to you, they just know they do. Let me start with a story about transformation. A real transformation, not a fairy tale. 3 years ago, I met a woman named Elena at a professional workshop. She sat in the back row, arms crossed, barely making eye contact. During the lunch break, I initiated a conversation, and she was polite but distant. She volunteered that she'd always been socially awkward, that she dreaded networking events, and that she'd accepted she just wasn't good with people. Fast forward to last month. I ran into Elena at a conference. But I almost didn't recognize her, not because she looked different, but because her entire energy had shifted. She was in the middle of an animated conversation with 3 people who were clearly hanging on her every word. When she saw me, her face broke into a genuine smile. Later, over coffee, she told me what had changed. I realized I'd spent 30 years trying to be interesting, she said. Once I stopped performing and started being genuinely interested in others, everything shifted. I'm not faking it. I genuinely love conversations now. I love learning about people. And somehow, they seem to love talking to me. Elena's transformation wasn't about learning tricks or techniques. It was about rewiring her fundamental relationship with conversation itself. And that's exactly what we're going to explore now. Part 1: Rewiring your conversational identity. The story you tell yourself. Right now, you have a conversational identity. It might be I'm shy, or I'm socially awkward, or I'm not good at small talk, or I'm an introvert, so social stuff drains me. Maybe it's I'm too quiet, or I talk too much, or people find me boring. These identity statements feel like facts about who you are. But here's the truth: they're not facts. They're stories. Stories you've been telling yourself so long and so consistently that they become self-fulfilling prophecies. Every time you think I'm not good with people, your brain looks for evidence to confirm that belief. You remember the awkward conversation at last week's party and forget the lovely chat you had with your neighbor. You notice when someone seems disengaged and miss the moments when people genuinely enjoyed your company. Your brain is literally filtering reality to match your story. This is called confirmation bias, and it's one of the most powerful forces shaping your social experience. But here's the liberating truth: if your conversational identity is just a story, you can write a new one. The neuroscience of identity change. Let me share something fascinating about your brain. For decades, scientists believed that adult brains were relatively fixed. That after childhood, your neural pathways were essentially set. But research in neuroplasticity has completely overturned this assumption. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on what you repeatedly think and do. Every time you practice a new behavior, you strengthen certain neural pathways and weaken others. It's like walking through a forest. The first time you forge a new path, it's difficult, you're pushing through undergrowth, stepping over fallen branches. But if you walk that path every day, eventually it becomes a clear trail. Meanwhile, the old paths you've stopped using gradually become overgrown. The same thing happens with your conversational habits. Right now, you have well-worn neural pathways for certain social behaviors. Maybe your default response to nervousness is to talk too much about yourself. Maybe your automatic reaction to silence is anxiety. Maybe your habitual pattern is to plan your next response instead of truly listening. These patterns feel natural because they're familiar. But they're not inevitable. Every time you choose a different response, you're literally rewiring your brain. Every time you practice genuine curiosity instead of performing, you're strengthening new neural pathways. Every time you turn the spotlight onto someone else instead of worrying about yourself, you're changing your conversational identity at a biological level. The three-phase rewiring process. Rewiring your conversational identity isn't instant, but it's also not as long or difficult as you might fear. In my work with clients, I've observed three distinct phases. Phase 1, Conscious Competence, weeks 1 to 4. This is the awkward phase. You're trying to apply new techniques, but they don't feel natural yet. You have to consciously remind yourself, ask a follow-up question. Don't interrupt. Show genuine curiosity. It feels like you're performing, and you might worry that people can tell. This phase is uncomfortable, but it's also essential. You're forging those new neural pathways. You're interrupting old patterns. Stay with it. The discomfort means it's working. During this phase, focus on 1 or 2 skills at a time. Maybe this week, you're practicing the spotlight reversal, deliberately focusing attention on others rather than worrying about yourself. Don't try to master everything at once. Build gradually. Phase 2, Inconsistent Application, weeks 5 to 12. Something interesting starts happening in Phase 2. Occasionally, these new behaviors feel natural. You have a conversation where you're genuinely curious, truly present, completely out of your head, and it feels effortless and wonderful. Then the next conversation, you fall back into old patterns. This inconsistency is not failure. It's progress. Those moments of natural connection are your new neural pathways beginning to strengthen. The goal isn't perfection, it's increasing frequency. You're having more good conversations and fewer awkward ones. You're spending more time genuinely connected and less time stuck in your head. During this phase, practice self-compassion. When you slip back into old patterns, don't berate yourself. Just notice it, without judgment, and gently redirect. Oh, I'm interrupting again. Let me return focus to them. That gentle redirect, repeated hundreds of times, is what rewires your brain. Phase 3, Unconscious Competence. This is where the magic happens. The new behaviors become your default. You don't have to think about asking follow-up questions, you're genuinely curious. So questions emerge naturally. You don't have to remind yourself to listen, you're actually interested in what people are saying. The spotlight reversal isn't a technique you're applying, it's become how you naturally show up. At this point, your conversational identity has fundamentally shifted. You're no longer someone who's bad with people, trying to fake being good. You've become someone who genuinely enjoys and excels at human connection. People can feel this authenticity, and they respond to it powerfully. Practical exercise: the identity rewrite. Here's a practical exercise for beginning your identity rewire. I want you to complete these sentences. Old identity statement: when it comes to conversations, I am. Write whatever comes to mind. No editing. Just the honest story you've been telling yourself. Evidence audit: times when this story was contradicted. Now, deliberately search your memory for counterexamples. Times when you connected easily. Conversations you genuinely enjoyed. Moments when people seemed to appreciate talking with you. Force yourself to find at least 5 examples. This isn't about pretending negative experiences didn't happen. It's about recognizing that your brain has been selectively focusing on evidence that confirms your old story while ignoring evidence that contradicts it. New identity statement: I am becoming someone who. Write the identity you're growing into. Not as fantasy, but as emerging reality. I am becoming someone who genuinely enjoys learning about others. I am becoming someone who makes people feel comfortable and valued. I am becoming someone who brings curiosity and presence to every conversation. Notice the phrase, I am becoming. This acknowledges you're in process. You're not forcing yourself to believe something that feels untrue. You're recognizing the direction of your growth. Read this new identity statement every morning for 30 days. Your brain will gradually begin to filter reality through this new lens, noticing evidence that confirms your growth rather than your limitations. Part 2: Confidence through connection. The performance paradox. For most of my early adult life, I misunderstood confidence. I thought confidence meant being impressive, having clever things to say, never appearing nervous or uncertain, controlling how others perceived me. So I approached conversations as performances. Before social events, I'd prepare interesting anecdotes. I'd rehearse witty responses. I'd strategize how to appear confident, knowledgeable, and interesting. And I'd leave these events exhausted, anxious, and feeling oddly disconnected despite having talked to dozens of people. Then I had a realization that changed everything. I was trying to extract confidence from others' approval. I was essentially asking them, through my performance, do you think I'm impressive enough? Do I deserve to feel confident? This is what I call the performance paradox. The harder you try to appear confident through performance, the more anxious and unconfident you actually feel. Because your confidence is entirely dependent on external validation. And external validation is unpredictable, unreliable, and never quite enough. The connection alternative. Real confidence, the kind that feels solid, grounded, and sustainable, doesn't come from performing well. It comes from connecting genuinely. When you shift your focus from how am I coming across to how is this person experiencing our conversation, something remarkable happens. Your anxiety decreases because you're no longer the center of your own attention. You're genuinely focused outward, on the other person. And here's the beautiful irony: when you stop trying to appear confident, you actually become more confident. Because your sense of worth is no longer contingent on someone else's approval. You know you're bringing something valuable to the interaction, your genuine presence, your curiosity, your attention, regardless of how impressive you appear. Let me illustrate this with a story about my client James. James was a brilliant software engineer who dreaded team meetings. He'd spend the entire meeting composing the perfect comment in his head, waiting for the right moment to speak, anxious that people would think he was stupid if he said something wrong. Usually, by the time he'd perfected his comment, the conversation had moved on. He'd leave meetings having barely spoken, convinced everyone thought he had nothing valuable to contribute. His confidence was at rock bottom. We worked on shifting his focus from performance to connection. Instead of trying to say something impressive, his new goal was simple: make at least one person in every meeting feel heard and valued. The next meeting, when a colleague proposed an idea, James didn't try to top it or critique it. He simply said, "I really like the core concept there, especially the part about user privacy. Can you say more about how you're thinking about implementation?" His colleague lit up and elaborated. The conversation deepened. And something unexpected happened. James's anxiety decreased. He wasn't worrying about looking stupid because he wasn't focused on himself at all. He was genuinely interested in understanding his colleague's idea. By the end of the meeting, multiple people thanked James for his thoughtful questions. One person even said, "You always help us think more deeply about things." James left that meeting with more genuine confidence than he'd felt in years. Not because he'd performed well, but because he'd connected meaningfully. Building connection-based confidence. How do you cultivate this kind of confidence? Here are 5 practices that build genuine confidence through connection. Practice 1, the outward focus pledge. Before any social interaction, make this pledge to yourself: for the next conversation, my goal is not to be impressive. My goal is to make the other person feel valued. This simple reframe takes enormous pressure off you. You're no longer responsible for performing. You're simply responsible for being present and generous with your attention. That's something you can control, regardless of how witty or articulate you're feeling. Practice 2, the vulnerability bridge. Counterintuitively, appropriate vulnerability builds confidence. When you acknowledge uncertainty, ask for clarification, or admit you don't know something, you're no longer protecting an impressive facade. You're showing up as a real human. I'm not familiar with that concept. Can you explain it? Honestly, I'm feeling a bit nervous about this presentation. Any advice? That's such an interesting perspective. I've never thought about it that way. These vulnerable statements create connection rather than performance. And connection is what builds real confidence. Practice 3, the success reframe. Stop measuring conversational success by how impressive you were. Start measuring it by how connected you felt and how valued you made the other person feel. After a conversation, instead of anxiously reviewing what you said and how you appeared, ask yourself: did I listen more than I performed? Did the other person seem comfortable and valued? Did I learn something new about them? Do I feel more connected to them than before? These questions shift your metric for success from performance to connection. And when you succeed by this metric, your confidence grows organically. Practice 4, the confidence inventory. Every evening, write down 3 moments from the day when you contributed positively to someone's experience through connection. Maybe you asked a good question. Maybe you really listened. Maybe you made someone laugh. Maybe you showed genuine interest in their story. This daily practice trains your brain to notice your positive impacts rather than obsessing over your awkward moments. Over time, you build a solid foundation of evidence: I do have valuable things to offer. Connection, curiosity, presence, kindness. Practice 5, the long game mindset. Real confidence builds slowly, through hundreds of small interactions where you practice these principles. Don't expect to feel dramatically different after one good conversation. But trust the cumulative effect. Every time you focus outward instead of inward, you're building confidence. Every time you connect instead of perform, you're strengthening your foundation. Every time you make someone feel valued, you're reinforcing your own worth. This is confidence through accumulation. And it's far more sustainable than confidence through performance. The social anxiety shift. Many people struggle with social anxiety, that gnawing dread before social situations, the racing thoughts during conversations, the obsessive mental replay afterward. I've experienced it. Most of my clients have experienced it. It's genuinely painful. But here's what I've discovered. Social anxiety is almost always rooted in self-focus. You're anxious about how you're appearing, whether you're saying the right things, what people are thinking about you. The spotlight reversal is one of the most effective anxiety reduction techniques I've ever encountered. When you deliberately shift your focus from how am I doing to how can I make this person feel comfortable, anxiety decreases dramatically. Your brain can't simultaneously worry about your own performance and genuinely focus on someone else's experience. These are neurologically incompatible mental states. So the next time you feel social anxiety rising, try this: find one person and make it your mission to make them feel seen and valued. Ask them questions. Listen carefully. Be genuinely curious about their experience. You'll notice something remarkable. Your anxiety will decrease, not because you conquered it through willpower, but because you redirected your attention away from the source of anxiety, yourself. This isn't suppression. It's transformation. You're transforming anxiety into curiosity, self-consciousness into other awareness, fear into genuine care. Part 3: The Final Mindset Shift. From Scarcity to Abundance. We've covered specific techniques, practical exercises, and psychological principles. But none of it will transform your experience if you don't make one final, fundamental mindset shift. Most people approach social interactions from what I call a scarcity mindset. They believe, attention is scarce, so I need to fight for mine. Interesting people are rare, so I need to prove I'm one of them. Connection is difficult, so I need to be strategic about creating it. Social success is a zero-sum game where someone wins and someone loses. This scarcity mindset creates a transactional approach to relationships. Every conversation becomes a negotiation. Every interaction is evaluated. What did I get out of that? Was it worth my time? Did I advance my interests? The final mindset shift is from scarcity to abundance. Specifically, the belief that every person has something interesting about them if I'm curious enough to discover it. Connection is natural and abundant when I show up with genuine presence. Making others feel valued doesn't diminish me, it enriches both of us. Social interactions are not competitions but opportunities for mutual enrichment. This isn't naive optimism. It's a fundamentally different lens for viewing human interaction. And when you adopt this abundance mindset, everything changes. The generosity principle. At the heart of the abundance mindset is what I call the generosity principle. You can afford to be generous with your attention, appreciation, and presence because these resources are unlimited. Unlike money or time, attention doesn't run out when you give it away. When you generously attend to someone else's story, you don't have less attention available for yourself. In fact, the opposite happens: your capacity for attention actually grows through practice. Similarly, appreciating others doesn't diminish your own worth. When you genuinely recognize someone's strengths, you're not somehow becoming less valuable. You're creating an environment where everyone's value is acknowledged and celebrated. This generosity principle is counterintuitive because we've been culturally conditioned to believe in scarcity. We've absorbed messages that attention is limited, that recognition is competitive, that if someone else shines, we're somehow dimmed. But human connection doesn't work that way. Connection is inherently abundant. When you make someone feel valued, you both benefit. When you listen generously, both of you grow. When you approach conversations with curiosity rather than competition, everyone wins. Seeing dignity in everyone. Here's the deepest truth underlying everything we've explored in this book: every person you meet carries an entire universe inside them. A lifetime of experiences, hopes, fears, dreams, heartbreaks, and joys. A unique perspective shaped by factors you can't even imagine. When you recognize this, really recognize it at a gut level, every conversation becomes an opportunity for discovery. The barista making your coffee? They have a whole life story you know nothing about. The annoying coworker who talks too much? They're dealing with something you can't see. The quiet person at the party? They have depths you haven't discovered yet. This recognition of universal human dignity transforms how you show up. You stop categorizing people as interesting or boring, useful or not useful. You start approaching everyone with the baseline assumption: this person is inherently valuable and has something I can learn. This doesn't mean you'll become best friends with everyone or that every conversation will be profound. But it means you'll never again waste an interaction by checking out mentally because you've decided someone isn't worth your attention. I learned this lesson from an unexpected source. I was on a long flight, and the man in the seat next to me struck me as completely unremarkable. Middle-aged, quiet, reading a generic thriller. I mentally categorized him as nothing interesting here and settled in with my own book. 3 hours into the flight, turbulence led to a brief exchange. Then somehow, we got talking. Over the next 2 hours, I learned he'd been a translator for the UN in conflict zones, had witnessed incredible moments of human courage and devastating moments of human cruelty, and was now writing that generic thriller as a way to process trauma while making it accessible to regular readers. His insights about human nature, conflict resolution, and hope in dark circumstances were profound. And I'd almost missed it entirely because I'd initially decided he wasn't worth my attention. Never again. Now I approach everyone with curiosity, with the working assumption that every person has something valuable to share if I'm present enough to discover it. The ripple effect you create. Here's what happens when you embody these principles consistently. You become a person that others feel good being around. Not because you're performing or impressing, but because in your presence, people feel more themselves. They feel less pressure to perform because you're not performing. They feel valued because you genuinely value them. They feel heard because you actually listen. They feel interesting because you're genuinely interested. And this creates a ripple effect you might never fully see. The person you made feel valued? They're more likely to extend that same generosity to the next person they encounter. The genuine connection you created? It reminds them that real human connection is possible in our distracted world. The curiosity you brought? It inspires them to be more curious with others. You're not just improving individual conversations. You're modeling a different way of being in the world. And that modeling spreads in ways you can't track or measure but that matter immensely. Your daily practice. Here's how to integrate everything we've covered into a sustainable daily practice. Morning intention. 1 minute before your day begins, set a simple intention. Today, I'll approach at least one conversation with complete presence and genuine curiosity. Midday check-in. 2 minutes halfway through your day, pause. Ask yourself, have I made anyone feel valued today? Have I had a genuinely connected conversation? If not, look for an opportunity in the afternoon. Evening reflection. 5 minutes before bed, write brief answers to these questions. What's one moment today when I made someone feel valued? What's one thing I learned by being genuinely curious about someone? What's one old conversational habit I noticed and redirected? This 8-minute daily practice, done consistently, will rewire your conversational identity more effectively than any intensive workshop or dramatic intervention. Closing, the conversation ahead. We've reached the end of this book, but really, you're just at the beginning of something. The beginning of a new way of showing up in the world. The beginning of deeper, richer, more meaningful connections. The beginning of becoming someone people genuinely love talking to. I want to leave you with one final story. It's about my grandfather, who passed away 5 years ago. At his funeral, I was struck by something. Person after person stood up and shared variations of the same memory. Your grandfather made me feel like the most important person in the world when he talked to me. This wasn't because my grandfather was impressive. He wasn't wealthy, famous, or particularly accomplished by conventional standards. He was a retired teacher who lived a quiet life. But he had a gift. He made everyone feel seen, valued, and genuinely important. I never got to ask him how he did it. But reflecting on my memories of him, I realize he embodied everything we've discussed in this book. He turned the spotlight on others. He was conversationally generous. He gave genuine compliments. He was truly curious about people's lives. And his legacy wasn't measured in money or achievements. It was measured in the hundreds of people whose lives he touched simply by making them feel like they mattered. That's the legacy available to you. Not through grand gestures or impressive accomplishments, but through showing up with presence, curiosity, and genuine care in your everyday conversations. The next conversation you have is your opportunity to practice. The next person you meet is your chance to make them feel valued. The next social situation is your laboratory for applying these principles. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to transform overnight. You just need to begin. To practice. To gradually rewire your conversational identity, build confidence through connection, and embrace the abundance mindset. Because here's the truth, the world needs more people like this. More people who listen deeply. More people who make others feel valued. More people who approach conversations with curiosity rather than performance, with generosity rather than scarcity, with presence rather than distraction. Be one of those people. Not because it will make you popular or successful, though it often does. But because it's a fundamentally better way to move through the world. For others, yes. But also for you. The conversations you have today will shape the person you become tomorrow. The connections you make will ripple out in ways you can't predict. The generosity you bring will return to you in unexpected forms. So go ahead. Have that conversation you've been avoiding. Reach out to that person you've been meaning to connect with. Walk into that social situation with curiosity instead of anxiety. See what happens when you stop trying to be interesting and start being genuinely interested. Watch what unfolds when you focus on making others feel valued rather than seeking validation for yourself. Notice how your confidence grows when it's rooted in connection rather than performance. This is your invitation. Not to become someone you're not, but to become more fully who you already are beneath the performance, beneath the anxiety, beneath the old stories you've been telling yourself. Someone who connects. Someone who cares. Someone who makes every person they meet feel just a little more valued, a little more seen, a little more important. Someone everyone loves talking to. That person is already inside you. You're just learning to let them emerge more consistently, more naturally, more fully. Welcome to the rest of your life. The conversations ahead of you are about to get much, much better. Now go have one.